Jon Hamilton, ladies and gentlemen. Jon, how's it going today?
I'm doing well, brother. How are you?
Not bad. Appreciate you coming on the show today. Looking forward to a good little conversation about a little bit about what you do, your background, as well as some questions that I got from some of my Instagram followers. I would guess that most people listening to this and most people who follow me probably have at least heard of Jon, if not follow Jon, if not started following me because of Jon or vice versa. But either way, I think you guys can get a lot out of this show and I'm really looking forward to it. So Jon, let's start with a little introduction. What's your background? Where are you coming from? And kind of how did that all prepare you to eventually join the Army and then eventually SF? Like, what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, man. First off, appreciate you having me on. We were just talking, been a long time coming. It's cool that we've kind of been congruent in the space. So it's cool to get together and discuss those ideas. So I kind of have a unique background. I'm from a lot of different places. I always joke with people, but I moved around quite a bit, moved 18 times before I turned 18. So kind of have a speckled background in that regard. Grew up playing sports, grew up training quite a bit. So that was always a big part of my life. And in times where, the family life and things like that weren't, perfect, I always relied on training and sports. So it's always been a huge part of my life. When I played football in high school, and it's kind of a funny story, but one of my good friends that I played with, my mom and his dad ended up linking up. So ended up being kind of a stepbrother situation. And his dad was a Green Beret back in the 80s and 90s. So kind of like the Cold War era, Green Beret, first group guy, spoke Russian.
Back when it was hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Last hard class.
Yep.
Spent a lot of time in South America and things like that. So kind of throughout my later high school years, started hearing his stories and kind of picking his brain, and he would like pull out boxes of like Russian coins and like Cold War era stuff. So kind of planted the seed of like joining the military at that point. Last couple years of high school, I was still playing sports, still like teetering on going to college. And then just talking to him, I was like, nah, man, I'm going to join the military. So I enlisted straight after high school. I actually did the delayed entry program throughout my senior year. Originally enlisted as EOD. So explosive ordnance disposal. Probably watched Hurt Locker too many times. But I always had the goal of going special forces just from having that upbringing, talking to my stepdad. So I ship out, and this is kind of a big learning point that we can dive into if you want. But shipped out as EOD, and kind of up to that point, I was like a decent student. I was like a decent athlete, but never really put a whole lot of effort into either one. I just kind of, skated by and did my thing, and took the same mindset into EOD. I was like, I'm going SF. This isn't like my main priority type of thing, and just buy me time until I'm old enough to go to selection. Ended up failing out of EOD pretty miserably. So like pretty much right away. So good kind of wake up call, slap in the face there. Ended up getting reclassed. So I was needs of the Army, got reclassed to an aviation job. And then during that was really kind of like what lit the fire under my ass and like got me motivated to, kind of fight back, and volunteered for the 160th. Ended up spending my first couple years there, went on a couple trips, and then volunteered for selection after my second trip to Iraq. And then kind of went the SF route, ended up in 10th group, and the rest is history in that regard.
Yeah, lots to unpack there. What exactly got you in EOD school? Were you just like a little overconfident? You kind of took it for granted, or you just didn't really care that much? Because like you said, you were kind of using it as a stepping stone, or what went down in that situation?
A couple things. I think the biggest one is not being mentally there. I was kind of looking 2 steps forward. I was always like wanting to go to selection already, things like that. But I think the biggest one is my study habits at the time. So obviously, I mentioned that I kind of skated by in the academics and things like that prior to getting into the military. So that led me to having pretty much non-existent study habits. And I didn't really know how to study. I just kind of winged it, right? So those things kind of contributed to my failure. But kind of the silver lining there is really like when I failed EOD school, that's kind of what led me down the path of like self-development. I'm like, oh, wow, I do actually have to put some effort in and like developed some systems. And once I started doing that and got a taste for it, I really enjoyed it, and everything that comes with it, obviously.
Yeah, man, I can totally relate to the study habits. Mine was a little bit more fire hosey. I was going pretty much dropped to make a very long story short. I dropped out of college a couple times after a couple attempts and finally went the x-ray route thinking, probably not going to do a lot of academic stuff. Like it's going to be mostly physical and just like being mentally tough. And of course, I became a Delta or an AC Delta student, showed up to SOCM, and it was like, oh man, I never developed study habits before. I always kind of skated by in academics, and now I have to really figure this out really quick. And it was also my third choice too. So I was like kind of unmotivated. But after I got there and I was like, okay, I've shown a lot of people how I like to quit things and drop out of things and stuff like that in the past. So it's time for me to actually apply myself and prove to myself mostly, but even like, people that support me and love me, I can actually stick with something and do it. So I can totally relate to that lack of study habit thing and just kind of like winging it with academics. And, I'm sure that would work pretty well for certain schools and certain units and pipelines, OSIT and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds like EOD would be a more, obviously it's a very serious job. You're in charge of explosive ordnance and putting things out and making sure no one dies. So I would assume that's probably actually a pretty tough job, especially for like an 18, 19-year-old like you probably were. So let's fast forward a little bit. Once you decided to go the selection route, what did your general selection train up approach look like? And you mentioned that you started to get into personal development. Did you kind of combine both your physical selection prep with your general personal development, like improving your character, improving your habits and stuff like that? Were those kind of like catalysts to one another, or how did that kind of look when you were going through that?
Yeah, you nailed it with the catalyst portion of it. They were absolutely catalysts for one another. Well, after the whole failure, and I got into the 160th, and I kind of got that taste of success and a couple deployments, it really started to drive home the importance of that development on the the mental side of things. Really started to prioritize intelligence more than I ever had in my entire life. So both of those kind of bled into the discipline aspect. And I always talk to guys like the discipline and showing up consistently for a long period of time is going to be the biggest driver of selection prep. If you take someone that hasn't really trained ever in their entire lives and now they're 16 weeks out from the potential selection date, that's a very, very steep hill to climb. So my selection prep, I always say it was multiple years. It was my entire time in, the 160th. It was always in the back of my head. Every time I would go run, I pictured myself kind of, in that selection or in the special forces pipeline. That's always where I saw myself. So it was a long time. I would say my actual train up for selection was relatively short. So backstory on that, I went to Iraq, and I went to Baghdad back when kind of ISIS started to pop off again. It was like 2014. And we worked with a fifth group team out there, and they were, protecting this like oil refinery, stuff like that. So it's like really what lit the fire. And as soon as I got back from that deployment and like working directly with those guys, I was like, all right, it's time. I'm going down and talking to the recruiter like right now. So I go in there, and it was like first week of November, and I go in and talk to the recruiter, and I was shooting for like a selection date of March. Obviously, kind of like what a lot of guys do. I'm going to go in the other half of the year, give myself like 6 months.
Yeah.
And I walked out of the office that day with a January 6th selection date. So I was going
Crash course.
Yeah, exactly. So ideally, in a perfect world, I would have spent a little bit more time building up, especially on the ruck capacity side. I had been rucking throughout that time, but coming off a deployment, you're not going to spend much time doing that. But I because I had that foundation built over those years of training, I could ramp up the volume decently, and through an imperfect, selection prep, went out there and got it done. And I was by no means like the top percentage of the class. I think I ran like a 12:15 when I was there, and like a 37-minute 5 mile. So I wasn't absolutely crushing it, but definitely good enough to get through the course.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought up those times, because a lot of people think that they have to be super stud runners. And while running is important, you got to pass the runs. You probably don't want to finish back of the pack. It's a very tiny, I have to tell this to a lot of my clients, it's a very tiny percent of your overall outcome at selection. Like, if you're really good at a bunch of other things and maybe you're not burning down 31, 32-minute 5 miles, like, and you're still meeting the standards, you still have a very good chance of making it. No one's going to be like, oh no, you crushed the entirety of selection, but you ran that 36, 35 mile. So you are not going to make it. That doesn't happen. And it freaks out a lot of guys. So I'm sure you probably have those conversations as well in your coaching. But yeah, it also goes to show that you don't necessarily need a perfect, especially, and this is something I emphasize all the time, you probably do too, with your guys that are already in the military prepping for selection, maintaining that general physical preparedness year round, so that if something happens, like kind of at the drop of a dime, like you got your selection date way sooner than you thought it was going to be, you're able to kind of turn on the gas and quickly get down to business and prepare for it, even if it's a little bit suboptimal. I'm also assuming, and we can talk about this, but I'm assuming you didn't really have the fitness knowledge that you have today. So you probably went about things maybe like, okay, I got to cram for this test, AKA do a bunch, way too much intensity, volume, whatever it may be. But hey, you showed up and you got it done, and kind of the rest was history. So what did that, just on a general overview of that selection prep, what did that look like for you? Were you doing like did you follow in a program? Do you have a coach, or did you kind of just do your own thing and hope for the best?
A little bit of both. I took some advice from the soft recruiters there, but obviously they weren't trainers. They had very limited knowledge in physical training as well. But I came from kind of a strength background, so I had been lifting weights since I was 14 years old, so I kind of relied on that. Went down to 3 lifting days per week, and then just ran hard all the time. I had no idea about zone 2. I didn't know anything about that. I just trained hard. So every Monday I would do a timed 5 mile run.
Nice.
Yeah. Tuesday was lift in the morning, and then a light ruck in the afternoon. Wednesday was another hard run, usually a little bit shorter though, 2 to 3 miles. Thursday was my long ruck. Friday was a lift, and then Saturday was a long run. So wasn't great, but looking back, it was okay, right? I didn't start learning really about training until after I got back from selection. I had a year left in between selection and the Q course that I owed the 160th, so I kind of fulfilled that. And then during that year is really where I started like learning more about training and got my times a lot better going to the Q course. So I was in much better shape going to the Q course than I was for selection. But 6-day training week, 4 runs, 2 rucks, and 2 lifting days.
Yeah, honestly, other than the fact the time trial every single Monday,
Yeah.
like that's not a bad, like doing speed work on Monday, lifting a few days a week, doing a couple more runs, a couple more rucks is not a terrible. I guys, if you're listening, I wouldn't write down exactly what he did and do that, and he would not recommend that either. But that is not a bad way to split it up, as long as, a lot of people think that speed work means go all out, run at race pace, test yourself every single week, or they think that lifting with low reps means go and max out every week or whatever it may be. And that's not the case. Just because you're going harder than, what an easy run would be, that doesn't mean you're going balls to the wall every single time, because you're probably and you probably found this too, you might have made some improvements for short periods of time and then maybe backstepped a little bit and then made some improvements for a little bit of time, instead of actually pacing it and, going off it. But honestly, I was the same way when I went through. I had a bigger running background than a strength background. And I had never heard of zone 2 until, again, like in the Q course. I'm like, oh, wow, it turns out you can run easy and it's easier to recover from. It doesn't beat you up as much, and it makes you potentially faster for when you're running hard. Interesting. Let me try that. Let me try that in the future instead of just going Steve Prefontaine every single run. So awesome, man. Let's go into a little bit of an overview of your career at 10th Group. I'm not sure if you were aware of this. I was a 10th Group from 2014 to 18. I was in 3rd Battalion, SECO, 0334. And yeah, great spot, great place to live. But what did that kind of look like for you? What are some of the career highlights you had over there?
Yeah. So I graduated the Q in 2018. Got out to 10th group, and I kind of got like thrown into the ringer like a lot of us do. I was on leave, in the process of buying a house at Fort Carson. Got a call from the guys I was signing in from. It was actually a guy I went to the Q course with, and he was like, "Hey man, you got to sign in. You're going to Afghanistan. Like, time now." So I was like, "Oh wow, this is real." So signed in, went over to Afghanistan. Ended up in a interesting situation. There's three of us. I was a Charlie. There's one other Charlie and a Delta. Delta went down south, and then me and the other Charlie were kind of going around to all the teams in the company and like trying out. So went up. It was cool. Got to meet several teams in the company. Got to go out on some missions with them. Really clicked with 1-1, which was my team. That was up in Kunduz. Ended up spending the majority of my deployment with them, and then went to that team after that initial trip to Afghanistan. Went to nothing crazy, did like cephalic or like low-vis cephalic, like austere med, some like, some of the specialty schools that are in SF during that time. And then the trip that we had after that was to Europe. It was just a JSET type trip, bouncing around there, working with some foreign partners. Then got out of that, came back to the U.S. and that's when the whole COVID thing started popping off, and a lot of the political drama with it. Afghanistan ended, and my contract was coming up. So I was like, man, I don't know if I really want to re-enlist with everything that's going on. I started getting kind of the entrepreneurial bug that a lot of guys do, was investing in real estate, stuff like that. So I was like, I'm going to get out, pursue that, and eventually start a family. So
Yeah, I can totally relate to that entrepreneurial bug. That same thing happened to me. My time at 10th group, for whatever reason, that was 2nd Battalion's time to shine over in Afghanistan. And I was in 3rd Battalion, and we were just doing, my first trip actually was kind of similar to you, except to Africa. I showed up, I was the only Delta in my company, and they're like, hey, by the way, Happy New Year. You're going by yourself to Africa to meet up with a team because their Delta's coming back for the Mountain Warfare School. And here's a bunch of money and sensitive items that you have to carry over there with you to Africa, flying by yourself. We're not going to tell you what it is. We're just going to give you this paperwork and good to go. So needless to say, that was kind of a crazy situation getting over there. But yeah, very similar. And then I did a bunch of trips to Europe, and I was like, I kind of wanted to go and make more of a difference. So of course I, went to the long walk. My listeners probably know all about that. And then I ended up not making it through OTC, going to 3rd group. And then I got my Afghanistan trip from 3rd group. And you brought up COVID. It was pretty much right after COVID hit. And so there were all these regulations over there. It was kind of a subpar Afghanistan trip, but we were the last people on the ground at Fob Shank, AKA Camp Dalkey.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, kind of like went down in history a little bit. Not necessarily me or our guys, but like just ending the war over there and, taking the footprint off. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, very, very cool that how things kind of work out like that. And that is also cool that you got put in that situation where you could kind of test out different teams and, see where you gel the most. That does not happen to everyone. And if you happen to show up and you are a good dude, and you are personable, you have great communication skills, you're a fit person. I always emphasize this to guys. The most important thing you can do in the later stages of the Q course, especially because you're able to, you're in language, is work on your physical fitness. Especially if you're an X-ray and you have no experience in the Army, you're not honestly going to bring much to the table other than being really good at your MOS and being super fit. And of course, being a good dude, but not being like too talkative or anything like that. So it always kind of blew my mind whenever we would get a new guy. I'm sure you probably experienced this too. A new guy shows up and somehow is just not in shape. And yeah, I never really was able to put my finger on it. Of course, it's a self-discipline thing and personal responsibility, but I feel like, you have all the time in the world compared to the other parts of the Q course to be consistent and go to the gym twice a day if you want, or train twice a day if you want. Not to say that's always better, but yeah, definitely if someone's listening to this that's in the Q course, highly consider showing up to your team as fit as you possibly can. There might be guys on your team that are fitter, but at least do your best to reach your potential and show up ready to crush. So yeah, let's transition a little bit over to the entrepreneurial thing.
Yeah, I would say too. I know we're going to dive into it a little bit, but fit as you possibly can doesn't mean jacked as possible. A lot of guys,
Right.
a lot of guys in the
Yes.
Q course are like, now is the time to get jacked and put on all this muscle, and then they show up slow. So still maintain that running capacity.
100%. And we actually have a question that is, we're going to talk about training for selection versus the Q course versus while you're in group a little later. And we'll bring that up again for sure. But yeah, today, what are you guys doing over at Infinite Grit? You guys seem to be crushing it in the content game as well as the coaching game. And it's pretty cool to watch. And, obviously you have a big following, a lot of supporters. I really dig all the content you guys put out. So what does that kind of look like? What's the structure over there? I know you got some guys, other SF guys working with you. So what does that look like?
Yeah, man. So started it pretty much immediately when I got out in January of 2023. And then, it started with content. I knew I wanted to get into fitness. I didn't really know much about the fitness business, anything, but it has always been something I was passionate about. And I started learning more and more as I was, I had an injury late in my career. So that's kind of what sparked me to learn more about it and overcome that injury, and then just kind of start nerding out on it. So I didn't really expect to be like selection prep help. But as I started posting content, those are the questions I started getting, made content answering those questions, and then it kind of gained traction and continued to grow. So right now we have a team of 5 guys. We focus primarily on the tactical athlete realm. About 50% of our guys are preparing for selection. About 20% are law enforcement or other branches, and then we have some federal agents in there as well. So it's myself, CJ, who was he was an 18 Echo turned Fox on the team. I met him in Afghanistan. He was the Echo that was doing all the JTAC stuff and dropping bombs. CJ was my senior Charlie. I'm sorry, Chris was my senior Charlie. Super solid dude. He was kind of like the dude I looked up to my entire career in SF, kind of like guided me through all of that stuff. And then we brought on Matt Powell, who's the current strength and conditioning coach down at 375. Worked with Cleveland Browns, Chicago Bears before that. So, and then we have some admin guys on the backside. So, built a team throughout the process. Now we're really focusing on delivering that product. And the big things that we focus on is providing the strength and conditioning, nutrition coaching, accountability, mentorship on Chris and CJ and my side. And then the education. So our goal, probably much like yours, is to speak to my 20-year-old self on the front side of all of that stuff when I was preparing for selection, and really focus on like the things that actually matter, and it's what's going to move the ball forward. So long-term goals, we're going to continue growing the online portion of it, but we do want to expand and do more in-person events. Setting some up for this spring. One of the events is kind of going to be like a mentorship weekend, kind of camping out, grilling out, bonfires, things like that. Do a little bit of land nav training, do a little bit of wilderness survival, first aid stuff. If you're, free.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, sounds
fly
awesome.
out to Arizona.
Absolutely.
And then we want to eventually in the future host kind of like weekend retreats for younger kids, like teens, and teach them about the outdoors, hunting, fishing, navigation, shooting a bow, stuff like that. So that's kind of our philanthropic, side of the house that we want to get into.
Yeah, you guys are definitely, you got a lot going on and seemingly crushing it. Obviously, we see the public facing things that go on in the business. We don't always see the behind the scenes stuff. And, obviously it's a lot to juggle, but it makes it, in my opinion, very fulfilling. And like you, actually, I didn't really think I was going to be a selection prep guy. I was planning on coaching just general people that wanted to get fit, as well as some tactical athletes that are already kind of in the soft realm. And I actually had a business coach briefly for a little while, and he kind of was like, dude, this is like where you should absolutely go for. And I was like, okay, yeah, it makes sense. And now I love it. It's freaking awesome. And I wouldn't change it for the world, but that is super cool, man. As you bring guys onto the team to work with you and help them prep for various selections, I'm assuming mostly SFAS. We'll kind of keep this mostly SFAS. What are some of the most common struggles? We'll talk physical struggles, training struggles, or even outside the gym that apply to physical struggles that you see guys go through as they're prepping for selection?
Yeah, number one is trying to do too much. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of different training plans, and probably the biggest thing we see when we have those initial consultations is guys just kind of taking like multiple plans and then just stacking them all up. And there's a lot of guys that don't necessarily understand the kind of the balance between intensity and volume, and they'll just try to do way too much of both. They'll end up at a plateau and not getting the results that they're looking for. In addition to that, I would say nutrition is probably a big one that guys kind of forego. And I talk to guys all the time about this. We have like a nutrition tracker, and we'll have them start tracking their meals. And sometimes guys, I literally had a conversation with a guy this morning, and they come in, their maintenance calories maybe at like 2,800 calories, depending on who they are. But they're eating like 1,700 calories a day or 1,900 calories a day, just unwittingly way below how much they should be eating. So that is obviously holding them back quite a bit, especially for like the smaller guys that are trying to, maybe come from a running background and trying to put on a little weight to carry the heavier loads. And then just the general, adherence or discipline to maintain the things outside the gym. We're going to dig into it in a little bit, I'm sure, but the biggest problem I see with guys is like they really want it. They like feel in their bones that they want to go to a team. They want to get through selection. So they have this high level of motivation to go out there and train really hard, really often, but they don't take care of the things like nutrition, like recovery, like having the patience to let the adaptations take place. Like they're just going hard in the gym and undermining their progress that way. So I always tell guys, like, if you really want it, you're not just going to go out there and pursue the exciting, shiny stuff of going on these training sessions or long runs or rucks. You're also going to make sure that you're getting sleep. You're also going to make sure you're getting proper nutrition and things like that. And that's always going to reflect in your results.
100%. Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that. I get a lot of new clients that I call it a 200% program. Basically, they take maybe a running program, they take a lifting program, both of which are intended to be followed, just that program, to get good at one thing. And then they just slap them together and boom, what do you have? A 200% program. If you're an absolute animal freak of nature, you might make a little bit of progress on that for a brief period, but eventually it's going to catch up to you. And yeah, it's all about trimming the fat and just doing what is necessary, identifying your strengths and weaknesses, of course. Am I more of an endurance prone individual? Am I more of a strength, power, etc. prone individual? A lot of times I ask guys what their background is, like their athletic background. Do they play more of an explosive sport like football, or were they sprinters, or were they non-athletic regular people? I call that a NARP. Were they more endurance prone and they got to put on some muscle? And the low calorie thing absolutely is huge. A lot of people think they eat a lot, and until you actually track, you probably don't have any idea what you're eating at the moment. Especially, I'll often find, and you probably notice this too, even if they are eating enough calories, oftentimes it's not enough protein, way too much fat. A lot of people talk about like, don't eat too many carbs. I find that most people that are not tracking and aware of it crank the fat up. They're eating tons and tons of fat, which if you're a regular person, you're not really training for any performance-based goal and you just want to be generally fit, healthy. What I usually tell people is, so long as you're hitting your protein and your calories and you're not, doing a bodybuilder diet where you're way, way, way too low on fat, most people don't accidentally eat too little fat, you're good. But if you're training for a performance-oriented goal, especially if you're on the leaner side, especially if you're on the side where you need to gain muscle and strength, eating high fat, and even if your protein is really good, generally eating super high fat, really low carbohydrates, you wonder why you're not performing very well in your tempo runs or your higher rep gym sessions or anything like that. It's like, that is all glycolytic. It requires carbohydrates. Yes, you can build muscle on a high fat diet, but it's not the best approach for it. And a lot of people also just think, like, when they think carbohydrates, they think pizza and donuts and muffins. And yes, there's carbohydrates in that, but guess what else is also in that? A lot of fat, and they're also not very satiating. So you get a guy on a higher carb diet, especially with like white rice, sourdough bread, lots of fruit, lots of potatoes, like actual carbs, that the main or only macro is carbohydrates in it. and they start feeling amazing. They start looking better, even if they're not even trying, at least in my experience, even if they're not trying to really change their body composition, it just does by default because they're fueling their training better. You have better workouts, you recover better, you put on more lean mass, and life is just a lot more enjoyable that way. And honestly, man, it took me a while to figure out that like my body runs way better on higher carbohydrates. I'm just a leaner individual. And although this is not like science backed or anything like that, it's just something I've observed. Usually people who struggle to gain muscle strength and really any weight, body fat too, just skinnier people usually thrive off way higher carbs than they think. And, you know, I'll put some guys when they start working with me, I'll put them on 550 grams of carbohydrates. They're like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I am sure. And obviously too, when you go that high in carbohydrates, you also have to cut the fat a little bit and be more mindful of that. Buy lean beef, buy, you know, eggs and egg whites instead of just eggs. Eat something other than 7 slices of bacon every single morning. Not that these foods are bad, don't get me wrong, but you got to make room for those carbs or else you're just going to be in this massive calorie surplus and kind of getting fat and water retention and all that kind of stuff. So let's switch that over to the psychological and the mental. You mentioned the outside the gym stuff, which I totally am 100% on board with. I noticed that a lot as well, especially in today's day and age where there's so many distractions and so many different ways you can go, different paths you can take, different people you can listen to, different things you can watch. Oftentimes, knowing more things and being more equipped with knowledge is not really the answer. It's usually like developing some good habits and doing them. So what would you say are some of the top things that you have to help guys with their outside the gym / mental approach, character building and stuff like that?
Yeah. The first one is kind of going back to that genuine desire. I'm sure you've met a lot of guys that prepared or are preparing or were in the course or whatever, and it was apparent that they didn't genuinely want it or know what that genuine desire looks like. They just want like the end state, and they don't know everything that goes into it. So the genuine desires, and a lot of times we'll have conversations with guys, and if guys think that they're eating or like that's too much, you know what I mean, like having that conversation like, hey, if you want this, like this is what's going to enable you to get to the performance that you're looking for. So stop doing all of this stuff outside of, or stop doing the multiple sessions, or beating your body down. Have some patience with it, and understand what that looks like and kind of the maturity with it. Number two, like actually going to selection is a lot of times presence of mind. I talked to guys about this. We can jump into the land nav portion as well, but I talk to especially younger guys is like the presence of mind. Like you're not expected to go out there and be this like shining star at selection. You're just expected to be someone that can hold their own, someone that can perform well, someone that can contribute to the team's success, that fills in gaps, that has their head up and doesn't just stare at their feet the whole time that they're in team week. And with that is a lot of presence of mind. And it's easy to sit here in like a nice, comfortable room, not, tired or not hungry, and think that I'm going to be completely fine in that environment. But once you're there and you're, on an unlucky team, 16 hours into a movement, the guys are starting to snip at each other and things like that, is having that presence of mind and being able to take that step back or not yell at somebody or blow up or cause those types of problems. So presence of mind, especially for younger guys who historically might be a little not as versed as, controlling their emotions. And then the last one is patience. The biggest one, it's a slow rolling process, especially like the prep going up to it. I mentioned my, prep lasted several years to get to that level of performance. And a lot of times less is more, especially with the crowd that really wants to get in the gym and get multiple workouts a day, end up being under recovered. And it's just having that patience. A lot of times, you mentioned it's not about like knowing every little thing about selection or trying to game the system. And to me, for a lot of guys, that is kind of a lack of patience, which is going to breed a lot of anxiety before even getting into the environment. If you're constantly in the the Reddit forums, if you're constantly trying to game every single aspect of selection, you're not demonstrating that patience. And a lot of times guys will get there, it's not exactly how they thought it was going to be or they read about, and then they're like, oh, man, I'm not prepared for this. What's coming next? And it develops that anxiety. So it's good to learn about, good to prepare, but don't, just have patience and understand that the process takes time. And if you're doing the big movers on a consistent basis and you're demonstrating consistency in that preparation, and you're just continue to put one foot in front of the other, you'll have a good odds of getting through it.
Yeah, actually, you just mentioned that process and doing that consistently and making little small steps in the right direction that end up, they don't really feel like you're getting very far. Like, hey, today I woke up, I did my workout exactly as programmed. It was a pretty solid session. It was nothing to write home about. Totally fine. I fueled for it well. I recovered from it well. I hydrated well all day. I didn't waste a bunch of time like scrolling social media today. Those are all little, seemingly unimportant, seemingly minor parts of the process that, when done consistently day after day after day, will not necessarily result in the outcome always, but they will give you the best chance of showing up prepared for the outcome you want. I actually wrote an article about this recently. It's just, instead, because so many guys, I'm sure you deal with this as well, so many guys are just full of doubts and uncertainties. Like, am I doing enough? Am I going to show up prepared? What if I didn't train enough? And usually this comes up as they get closer and closer and closer, even sometimes during their taper when they shouldn't be doing really much of anything. And they're like, oh no, I forgot to train for this. Let me go like double tap on that, even though you can't make physical fitness adaptations in the last 5-6 days before you go to selection. So that one's huge, man. And patience, I totally agree with that too. Not just for SFAS, not just for selection, the Q course. If you're impatient, like very, very impatient, or you can't deal with being bored for prolonged periods of time and at least get through it, even if you hate it, whether you hate it or whatever, getting through being bored and having to be patient for things is massive, because this job, we see very small snippets of the cool guy stuff, the jumping out of planes, the doing CQB, the riding in Zodiacs, doing VBSS. That is like maybe 1% of the job, maybe 2%. There's a lot of things that require patience. There's a lot of boredom that you have to endure. And if you're struggling to do that right now, and honestly, I often tell guys to practice being bored. Like, give yourself a challenge, 10 minutes a day, where you just either sit still, you can walk around, whatever, but you're not talking to anyone, you're not listening to anything, you're not doing anything on the computer, you're not working, you're just bored. And honestly, like, starting out, you can just practice it. If you go to the grocery store or if you go somewhere where there's a line, you'll notice that pretty much everyone, especially people who are younger, maybe not older people, but you'll notice that most people, when they're waiting for something in line, or if they're even waiting, if they pull into a parking lot, I call it the park and scroll. They park their car. Instead of going in, it's usually something they don't really want to do, so they delay it. They'll just start scrolling. And that is kind of training you to never, ever be bored. And when you don't have that skill, you're not equipped with that skill, it can be very problematic when all of a sudden you're at SUT and you're laying in the prone for 5 hours waiting for Op 4 that's a couple hours late because they got hung up at the last objective to show up. And you're like, oh my goodness. And you have to stay awake, by the way. It can be really rough. So I think, practicing being bored, even though that sounds kind of like ridiculous, it is a massive skill to build. And I totally agree. I would say it's very common, at least in my experience, for guys to sabotage themselves, hurt their chances of being as prepared as possible, doing things other than training outside the gym, whether you have crazy sleep and wake habits, whether you have no evening routine whatsoever before bed, whether you press snooze 7 times every single morning, you start your day with 7 consecutive lies. That is just not a great way to go about it. And that's all part of the process that, when executed day after day after day, or even break it down into hour after hour after hour, of course, you don't have to be perfect all the time. You don't have to be this robot that just never has any vices or goes off track at all. But if you can have like a higher percentage of daily wins than daily losses, or daily just kind of like no contests, then you're going to set yourself up for a lot more success. You're just going to be more prepared, and you're going to feel better mentally as well. Because like, these things can really drain your dopamine. And you ever spend a couple hours of just mindlessly on the internet, or you're supposed to be doing something else, but you don't really want to, so you pull your phone out. There's so many things that can distract us, and no one ever feels better after they do that. Like, at least I don't. I feel way worse. I've gotten way better at not doing that these days, but I have in the past, and you just feel significantly worse. So
It's content research.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let's talk about some of the biggest habits that you try and drive home with your guys. Like, what do you have them do? Non-training habits. As we've already talked about, most guys who are pursuing this are type A. They have probably in their lives experienced work harder, work more equals better results. Or if all else fails and I try a bunch of things, I can always just work harder or do more and I'll eventually get the result. With fitness, it's not really like that. So, of course, once we get that understanding of train to give us the stimulus, train to give us the ability to adapt and make progress, what are some of the habits that you emphasize with your guys outside the gym in order to make their entire train up pipeline process a lot more effective?
Yeah. You already touched on one, the whole phone thing where you're pulling up your phone 10, 15, 20 minutes of scrolling throughout the day. That done multiple times really starts to add up. One of the biggest things, obviously, like with any plan, we touched on it, but one of the biggest things is consistency. Probably the biggest thing is just consistently getting the stimulus, consistently taking care of the nutrition and recovery. A lot of guys kind of start to lack on the consistency because maybe they have a full-time job, maybe they have all of these family obligations outside of it, and they're adding up time spending 5-10 minutes here and there on their phone throughout the day. So one of them is reducing that time. I encourage guys to time block. So whether it's
Love it.
using bullet journaling, whether it's whatever you like to use, I use Google Calendar. And the way I personally do it, and have a lot of guys that do it in there and see good success on it, is at the start of the week, time blocking out where they're going to do the workouts, the time that they're going to do it, if they can, if their job allows for it, obviously, and the obligations that they have to get done that week. So there's no question. These are the big things that I need to get done. They're already scheduled. If I just stick to the plan, I'll be good. And then we schedule in free time in there. I think a lot of guys in this realm, I was the same way when I was there. I was, always wanted to go, 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 and always felt like I had to be doing something to make that progress. Sometimes the best thing we can do is relax or do the things that we enjoy doing, and that's going to have big positive impacts on our consistency. So with the time blocking, again, I like to use Google Calendar throughout the day. Like at the end of the day, I'll go back and I'll color code what I did, what I didn't do. If I did it, it was green. If I didn't do it, it was red. And that way, by the end of the week, I can kind of have that internal audit and be like, I've skipped out on 4 editing sessions. I'm really falling behind on that. You know what I mean? So then we can figure out where we need to put our focus on. So time blocking is probably the biggest thing that I encourage guys to do. Other than that, going to bed early. Sounds funny. Everyone focuses on waking up early, which I agree with. But if you go to bed early, it's going to be hard not to wake up early. And there's a lot of things a lot of distractions that happen late at night, right? Obviously, we work with younger guys, usually early 20s, things like that. So one of the biggest ones is video games. And guys can spend 3, 4, 5 hours at nighttime playing video games, stay up till midnight, 1 in the morning, and then they have to wake up at 7 to go to work. So that is just cutting into your recovery, and it kind of comes back to the discipline and like actually wanting it. So going to bed is a big one. Another one is just reducing those overall stress levels from a recovery standpoint. Obviously, in recent times, there's been a huge emphasis on cold plunging, saunas, red light therapy, which is all cool. Not hating on it at all. But one of the biggest things that guys skip, or they assume that that's going to be kind of the big movers. The big movers in regards to recovery is getting the time of sleep and then reducing your overall stress levels. So if that means spending time with your significant other, going out to dinner, enjoying yourself a little bit, then that is going to be completely fine in that. And then the last one I encourage guys to do is just manage relationships. Going into selection, we're all going to have a whole lot of self-doubt. Pretty much any big goal you have, whether it's selection related or not, you're going to experience that self-doubt. I'm sure you do. I experience it when I post online sometimes. Like it's
100%.
always going to be there, right? So I encourage guys to surround themselves with people that are going to support their endeavors and not contribute to their self doubt, or at least have the understanding of those people. So we do a little exercise where we do like an internal audit of people in your lives, and it's not. I never say like, hey, cut that guy off or whatever. Like, still be respectful, but just have the understanding. And we break them down into the expanders, detractors, and kind of those neutral players. So the expanders are like your homies, the dudes that are like in your corner, supporting you, pushing you to go to the gym, get the training session in so you can go crush selection. The detractors can be, I often joke about it. Hope she doesn't see it, but I often say like my mom is a detractor, right? Like I love her to death. I'll never cut her out of my life, but a lot of times like with Infinite Grit or anything that's like non-standard, they can be a detractor. So it's not about cutting them out. It's just like approaching that relationship as such. And I don't go share my big goals and aspirations, because sometimes I can leave those conversations kind of feeling the self-doubt or like, is this the right choice? Or, you know what I mean? Like that hesitancy. So be careful who you share it with, but lean into the people that are your expanders. So going to sleep early, managing relationships, and managing stress are the biggest things outside the gym that I encourage guys to do.
I dig that, man. I actually just did a recent episode where I pretty much, my 35-year-old self now, I made a post on this on Instagram as well. I gave myself 35 pieces of advice
I saw that for your birthday.
as if I was a 21-year-old going at it again. And the relationships one was absolutely massive. And you mentioned, the detractors, even though, and I said this, I was like, even though you live under the same roof as someone, even though you drink beer at the same bar as someone, even if you have the same parents as someone, or even if someone is your parent, that doesn't always mean that they're going to help you drive forward. They're not going to like necessarily support you. Or even if they don't overtly say that they don't support you, a lot of people will like undermine what your goals might be, and they'll kind of do it subtly, and it's kind of hard to pick up on unless you're very aware and mindful of it. And that really does add up. Relationships are massive. There's this, everyone talks about this one study where they compared bad relationships to like smoking a pack a day on your health. And a lot of people will also talk about like the blue zones, the people who live forever. And, it must be their diet. It must be this, and this. One thing that they all have in common, because they all have slightly different diets, they all have different places they live. One thing they all have in common is they are low stress, and they have a purpose, and they have great relationships. So that should tell you something right there, if nothing else. And then the waking up, or the going to bed early. That is one, in my opinion, one of the biggest, highest leverage habits you can possibly build. Because like you said, usually when you get up early, of course, if you go to bed late and you wake up early, you're kind of missing the point, because getting up early, like you said, is awesome, but not if it comes at the sacrifice of sleep.
Exactly.
To get up early and actually feel the benefits and see the benefits of it, you also have to still get enough sleep. And I personally am a big time early bird. I love waking up early, and it's not for everyone. We all have chronotypes. Some people don't do well in the morning, and that's fine. But a lot of people kind of convince them, at least this is my theory, a lot of people convince themselves that they're night owls. And what do they do at night? What are you doing at nighttime in the last couple hours before bed? Is it like grinding towards your goals? Is it having really, really good conversations with people who are going to really help you and drive you forward? Usually, most people at nighttime, unless you're like an entrepreneur that prefers working at nighttime, most general people are eating a bunch of crap food, sitting and watching 7 episodes of whatever show in a row, sitting on their phone, scrolling, drinking alcohol, or like you said, playing video games. Usually, if you get up early, you're not getting up early to do all those things. So I can't remember where I heard this quote, but it's don't stay up late for anything you wouldn't get up early for. And if you live by that quote, then you're probably going to get pretty far in life. Nothing magic about getting up early, the act of it itself, but there's a reason that a lot of people who do big things and are successful tend to wake up early, because when you're getting up at a super early hour, you don't have to get crazy with it. You don't have to go Jocko style and sometimes get up at like 1:30, 2 a.m. But usually when you're getting up that early, it's because you have a very clear vision of what your goal is. And you know that the sooner you get started today, the better the day's going to go. You're going to get at least this is the way I do it. I knock out most of my important things that I don't want to be thinking about for the rest of the day early on in the morning before I really do anything else. And it works really well for me. Of course, guys prepping for selection, we don't have the same goals. We don't have the same ambitions and aspirations, but it's definitely something to consider. And then also, newsflash, when you go to the Army, you're probably going to have to get up early most days. Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, I love that, man. Let's talk a little bit about some of your habits. Since you've gotten out, and you can even go back to like when you were still in, but what are some of the like big rocks that you focus on each day to kind of continue moving the needle forward? This could be professionally, it could be family wise, it could be fitness wise, really wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. So basically 3 things. 1 is work. 2 is like personal development, like skill development for things that I'm just generally interested in. And then 3 is trying to spend time with my family. I'm sure you're in the same boat. We're probably very similar mindset in this, that we get very kind of obsessed with a goal. Yeah. And it's really easy to work a lot towards it. So just scheduling that time in there. So each morning, much like yourself, I have an initial block where I remove all distractions, remove my phone. It's before anybody wakes up. And that is when I actually focus on my creative work. So pretty much majority of my content, majority of my stuff all stems down to writing. So that's what I focus on in the mornings. Then I do my client check-ins and things like that. From the personal development side, I have been a big kind of a nerd about language learning. So that is like my consistent habit, aside from going to the gym, that continues my kind of self-growth, right? I learn a lot of different things through the languages that I learn, and then just getting that consistency and that delayed gratification is kind of a muscle that we continue to build. And then for me is going to the gym and actually training with a particular purpose. So this last weekend I did a Ragnar Ultra. It was like 32 miles, but I like to kind of schedule those things out. Now that I'm out of the military, I didn't really do them while I was in, but I'd like to have like an end date or an upcoming challenge that I'm training for. And that kind of gives me that fulfillment with the training side of the house. Then once those things are done, obviously any of the admin tasks throughout the day, then kind of allow myself that peace of mind and that fulfillment. Or the way I say it to my guys is, especially like towards the end of the week, so I'll send them a message tomorrow, but I don't like to go into the end of the day or the weekend with the regret of those unfulfilled promises kind of looming over our heads. I think a lot of guys, get to the point where they're like, oh, I have burnout, I'm so stressed, I'm all this stuff. And if you look at the things that they do on a daily basis, most of the time they're just not adhering to the things that they say they're going to do. If we do that and we allot the time that, we can spend, I like going into the woods and hunting or spending with my family or whatever. If we're doing those things in our lives, then it's a little bit harder to get to that point of burnout.
Totally agree with that. Yeah. If I've had weeks where I don't really follow through with everything I had intended to do, usually because it's something that's a little bit more seemingly burdensome or intimidating, things that like typically people procrastinate, and just like anyone else, sometimes I do as well. But the way I kind of look at it is, regardless, you're going to be stressed. Do you want to be stressed when you're doing it? Even if it's something really hard and daunting, yeah, you're going to be stressed, but like at least you're going to be doing it. Or do you want to be stressed and anxious and mad at yourself because you decided not to do it? And when you make that distinction, you kind of really, of course, it's easier said than done. That's just, something I kind of remind myself, and I still have to, of course, follow through and do it. But that one is huge. Just, reminding yourself that either I'm going to be beating myself up because I didn't do all these things. I have all these loops open. That's what I like to call it. Especially at the end of the day, I make sure that all my open loops either get closed or I plan them out exactly when I'm going to do them tomorrow. That way I'm not thinking about it, when I'm eating dinner, hanging out with my wife, going to bed or something like that. It like detracts from my sleep. But I always make sure that I at least have a plan to close the loops, or I close them at the end of the day or the end of the week or whatever it may be. And it just gives you a lot of peace of mind. And I think that would actually, of course, for, with different specifics, if you're prepping for selection or if you're in the military, you're in SOF, whatever it may be, your loops that you have to close are going to be different than what Jon or I have. But it is something to kind of test yourself on and see, like, what do I do throughout the week that is either making me kind of stagnate, or maybe even for a lot of people, making me take a couple steps back. And then I have to take those steps again, and then I have to go beyond it. And then, I'm maybe going to take some more steps back. So love that, man. Let's talk about the Ragnar. Was that a ruck or a run?
It was a run. So
nice. How'd it go?
It was good, man. It was like 4-man teams. Did it with a local member of the community. So he invited me out to it a couple months ago. And I have a bad habit of not being able to say no to anything like that. So no, it was really fun though. It was basically, 4-man teams. We did 10 to 11 mile loops. There's like 3 different loops. And then you run one loop, and then you wait for the other 3 guys in your team to run. And then you continue to do that for, the 32 miles. So ended up running kind of throughout the night through the Arizona desert on the trails up in the mountains. So it was a good time.
That sounds amazing. Sounds like right up my alley.
Yeah, dude, you would enjoy it. It was fun.
Nice, man. What are you training for next, and or what does your general training week look like? You don't have to get down to sets, reps, everything, but how do you kind of split that up?
So might be doing another ultra style run later this spring. Right now, kind of getting back to my roots in regards to hunting. Hunting has been a huge part of my life ever since I first joined the Army, and kind of over these last couple of years of building Infinite Grit, I've really just like focused solely on Infinite Grit, nothing else.
I hear that.
So now I'm getting back into it. And then with that is really just building up my aerobic base so I can go spend 3 days at a time with a pack on my back walking through the mountains. So got a hunt coming up in December. So a little bit more focus on aerobic capacity or building or, spending more time in zone 2 right now. But my training week looks like Monday, I have a zone 2 run, 45 to 60 minutes in duration. Tuesday, I do a full body split or full body workout with an emphasis on upper body. So with all the strength days, focusing on the main lifts, bench, squat, deadlift, overhead press, and with the initial lifts in the program doing a 5-3-1 throughout the phase. So Tuesdays, full body workout with emphasis on bench press. Wednesdays, my speed days, consisting of 4 800-meter runs, and then once or twice a month doing mile repeats. Thursdays, the strength session, lower body focus. Friday, zone 2 run. And then Saturday is a strength session, pull focus.
Dig it, man. I actually, funny enough, just switched back to a full body split. And obviously when you switch back to, or you switch to a new split or a new program or whatever it may be, there's that beginning novel stimulus that gets you super excited. But I got sick, like very sick a couple weeks ago, recovered from that, took like 8 days off from training overall. And then also I decided to change my split up. Usually I do like upper, lower, or I'll do a push-pull legs, not 6 days a week. I'll do, 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, just kind of asynchronous to the week now that I can just choose which days I train and, set my own schedule. But just started to do the full body, and I am probably 6 or 7 sessions in. I literally just train every other day. So it's not necessarily like 3 days a week. It's 3.5, 4 days a week because it's just every other day. And I love it, man. It is awesome. I don't necessarily have any other than the deadlift. I've been working on my deadlift, bringing that back up. Usually I take a bunch of time off for a while on the deadlift, and then I reintroduce it just because if I do it year round, it just beats me up too much. And that's really the only like barbell lift I really do anymore. I'm just built really well for it. But yeah, definitely something to say for trying a new split. And I honestly, I would guess that you probably think the same thing. Most people, and I'm talking not even 60% or 70%. I'm talking probably 80, maybe 90% of lifters would get better results on a full body split. That doesn't mean you have to do it every single time, or you could do something like what Jon does and do an upper biased or a bench biased full body day where you're just touching on other muscle groups, or a squat biased full body day where your main lift is that squat, but then you're hitting on maybe some arms, some upper body, some shoulders and things like that. Most people will get better results that way for multiple different reasons. One, consistency. If you miss a workout and you're training full body, guess what? You still hit most of the body that week. A lot of people tend to not train the days they like the least, which a lot of times is either leg day or pull day. And everyone really loves push day. So you take a couple of days off. Oh, let's go back. My default day after some time off, guess what? It's going to be push day. And I'm sure you see this too. A lot of guys just have overdeveloped pushing muscles, underdeveloped pulling muscles, underdeveloped like posterior chain in general. And yeah, knocking out that full body. Additionally, I'm assuming you may do this for that reason. Full body, you don't really get anywhere near as sore if you do a full body program properly. If you don't do it properly and you do full body, as in you do a full leg day, a full upper day, all in one session, yeah, you're going to be completely destroyed. But a nicely split full body routine where you're just touching on everything, you have probably a main lift and maybe some accessories, or a couple main lifts and some accessories, you get way less sore and, in my experience, less fatigued, and therefore it will interfere a little bit less than like on your conditioning sessions, especially if you're trying to build like conditioning running at the same time. So I really dig that, man. I think that pretty much covers the interview portion of the podcast. I think we're going to get into a couple of questions. These questions were from my new Google form that I put in my bio on Instagram. You can also find it on my website if you have questions in the future. I have put this in because Instagram, I love doing the Instagram question, and I know John does as well, but there's a character limit and therefore there's going to be a context limit. So I've opened this up for people to ask a little bit more contextual and a little bit more detailed questions. I did get some questions that were like AP style, full essays of someone's entire life story. So I didn't choose any of those questions, but I think we've got a pretty good variety of questions that we can kind of go back and forth on and share our opinions. A lot of things that John and I talk about, we agree on, but I think having two different viewpoints where we can kind of bounce back and forth will be a good thing. So we'll start with the first question. This one's a very interesting one, and I think it's going to be a good one to start with. I am working in law enforcement where it's a 4 days on, 4 days off work to off day split. What do you recommend for splits and selection prep? Splits as in training splits for the listeners. So we'll let you start with this one and we'll kind of just go back and forth.
Yeah, hopefully we can find something that we don't agree on, so we can debate a little bit.
Exactly, yeah.
But with this and kind of going back to the whole splits thing, I do like a push-pull legs. That's something that I enjoy. But with most people, especially working a full-time job and working 4 days on like this, I would absolutely do a full body split. Just if something comes up, if you have those limited training days, you don't want to crush yourself on those 4 days where you actually can train and end up being super sore for your shift, especially in law enforcement. Your legs hurt, you can't freaking chase dudes down, whatever you're doing. So I would do a full body split with the days that you are working. It depends on what your schedule looks like when you're working. Are you doing, 12 on, 12 off? Are you spending a lot of energy in those particular working days, or is it primarily stagnant? Are you able to recover well? And I would use that information to kind of dictate what type of workouts you're doing. But for the most part, I would focus on those first 2 days of that 4 day block. And then I would focus on those shorter sessions, things like a tempo run or shorter runs. And then I would have some calisthenics, especially if you don't have access to a gym at your station, but you can, get some calisthenics in where you're at. And then I would probably train at least 3 of the days that you're not in or you're not working, 2 full body strength sessions. With those, I would have some anaerobic conditioning towards the end. So keep it low impact. I would do assault bike, rower, something to get your heart rate up, short in duration, 5-10 minutes, probably do like a 30 on, 15 off, or 20 on, 10 off. So kind of that HIIT style workout. And then we would incorporate a longer run in one of those, and then a ruck march, especially if you're going for selection prep. So when you break it down to the split, making sure that you're hitting all of the working sets per muscle group per week, identifying, or you're probably going to talk about it too, but like the key movement patterns, you're still covering down on those, still getting your carries in, still building strength, not developing a ton of soreness, and then you're getting the miles in that you need on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I largely agree with almost all of that. I will say, because you have this interesting 4 day on, 4 day off, as opposed to what most people have. Usually most people work 5 days on, 2 days off, and therefore they split their training calendar. A lot of people will train, 5 days a week. If you're training for selection, a lot of people will train 6. They'll do that long endurance run on Saturday. But what you could do here is an asynchronous split. So an asynchronous split is just a fancy word for it doesn't match up with the 7-day work week. John kind of went over each of the training sessions and kind of like the days to consider doing them. But if you think of your week as just 8 days and you have 4 days on and 4 days off from work. I 100% agree while you're working, especially if you have any sort of shift work, if you're working later in the day, that's just not great. And usually law enforcement, especially 4 days on, 4 days off, I'm assuming your shifts are probably going to be 12 hours. That's just my guess. But those work days, your stress levels, even if you're not doing a bunch of, high speed chases or anything like that, you're not running down bad guys, your stress levels are going to be higher on those days. So what Jon said, keep those training sessions on your work days short, not just because you're probably not going to have a ton of time to do a 2-hour ruck or whatever it may be, but additionally, your recovery is going to be kind of a little bit in the gutter on those days. So I would probably do your 2 short workouts, maybe a full body session or a calisthenics plus carry day. Calisthenics plus carries or strongman work. You can incorporate some sled work and things like that. Basically think of it as like team week prep as well as prep for the APFT and also the CRA, which is now go, no go. And you actually have to pass that. And that's just a bunch of sandbag carries and drags and things like that. That session, you could probably get that done in 45 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. And get a really good stimulus out of it. And it shouldn't be too crazy fatiguing. Usually strongman work, if you do it right, it's kind of a blend of conditioning and strength, which usually I'm not a huge fan of doing conditioning and strength at the same time and trying to get the best of both worlds, because usually you just get like a suboptimal stimulus of both. Like if you're doing circuit training or like super short rest periods, trying to turn your lifting into cardio. But strongman work is an exception and absolutely should happen in a selection prep, because guess what? Newsflash, you're going to be doing that. And I've talked about this a lot in my show. But other session, agree. It should be something like a tempo run, shorter run, more intense. That's totally fine. Maybe like your first work day, you train your first work day, you take your second day off, you train your third work day, take your fourth one off. That way, that fourth work day, you got the whole work week built up. You got like a lot of stress. You might be feeling a little fatigued. You can get a really good night's sleep that night. We'll talk about sleep here in a second, and then go into a good solid training session the next day. So asynchronous split, you train 6 out of those 8 days and the 2 days off. Generally, of course, auto-regulate, make changes as needed. If you're feeling beat up or banged up or overtrained or overreached, dial it back a little bit, allow your recovery to kind of catch up. But you train 6 out of those 8 days, and 2 of those days off are your work days. Now, you might be thinking, but I don't have any days off where I just have no work or training. And that is correct. But the last few months before you go to selection, I think that's just the cost of doing business. And of course, like occasionally taking a day off where you're not actually working is probably going to be a good thing, both physically and mentally. But probably you're just going to be more primed to perform and recover on the days that you're not working. Especially a big thing I want to get into with this question. We won't do an entire lifestyle prescription for you here, but one huge thing that a lot of people do, whether they work odd schedule like this or whether they work a completely normal 9 to 5 days a week, they will give themselves jet lag every single week for a couple of days by going to bed a lot later on weekends and sleeping in on weekends. And believe me, I have been in this boat for a long time before I knew any better. If you basically think of it as flying from New York to LA every single weekend and back, but you're doing it all in the same spot, but you're just going to bed later and waking up later. If you say you go to bed at 9 p.m. on weekdays, you wake up at 5, and on weekends you go to bed at midnight and you wake up at 8. That's giving yourself 3 hours of jet lag. It's going to take you at least a couple days to get back on a good solid sleep schedule. A lot of people who do this, they wonder why they can't sleep on Sunday nights. It's because their body's just not ready for sleep because they kind of self-induced it. And I'm not saying to be a complete monk, although I would say there is definitely merit going into monk mode where you're just very dialed in for the last couple of months before selection. But, if you have a special occasion or you got family in town and you want to catch up with them, or you go out to dinner a little bit later, not a huge deal. But if 27, 28 days per month, you can go to bed within the same half hour every single night and wake up within the same half hour every single night, you are going to be your sleep quality. A lot of people just think sleep quantity, which is important for sure, but sleep quality, the biggest thing you can possibly do for sleep quality is consistency. Going to bed around the same time. Doesn't have to be down to the minute, doesn't have to be exact, but around the same time, even on the days that you're not working, that is going to set you up for massive success. Jon kind of touched on this earlier with the going to bed early. One thing that I think is a really good tip and hack for a lot of people is setting a nighttime alarm on your phone. If you guys have been listening to any of my episodes and probably Jon's content as well, you know that staring at your phone before bed is not going to assist you in getting into a good solid deep sleep for multiple reasons. We won't get too into them, but it's part of it is the stress of just scrolling. Part of it's the dopamine. Part of it is the blue light that is coming off the screen. So if you have a nighttime alarm that goes off every single night, an hour before you go to bed, that is your plug me in alarm for your phone. And that's when you can kind of start a nighttime routine. That would be my biggest outside the gym tip for this individual to kind of stay on track.
Yeah. And don't go crazy with caffeine, especially like shift work. And if you're training in the afternoon or if you're coming off the shift and your hours change during that week, a lot of times guys can drink a whole bunch of caffeine, go to the gym, and then an hour or two later they're trying to go to bed, and there's not going to be quality sleep, like you said.
Yeah, I actually talked about that in a very recent episode. Someone was having trouble sleeping after they train in the evening. And he didn't say he was doing this, but I kind of just like, if you are doing that, definitely stop doing that. It might suck for the first couple of days if you're used to this, because I know a lot of people do this. They finish their workday and they're tired, so they slam pre-workout and they go to the gym. When you stop doing that, you're going to sleep better, and you're probably going to have a couple workouts where you kind of have to drag your ass through it. But coincidentally, if you stop doing that, you're going to stop wanting that caffeine in the evening because you're going to sleep better and recover better. And therefore you're going to be more prepared to work out. So it's this vicious cycle, and I've been in it myself before, and just kind of bite the bullet, having a couple days where you don't have caffeine before that workout and kind of drag your way through those workouts is totally worth it. And also you're going to want to quit caffeine anyway before you go to selection. So you're not having caffeine withdrawals during gate week. That would not be very optimal for performance. So yeah, hopefully the question asker got some good stuff out of that question. And let's hop into question number 2. I averaged less than 10 miles per week. Those miles were mostly hard intervals and tempos. Is a decline in speed and aerobic development inevitable when base building? Building to 30 miles per week of zone 2 plus strides will take a couple of months for me, and that makes me uncomfortable. Thank you, TTM and Grit. You are welcome. I'll go ahead and start with this one. So assuming you're at 10 miles per week now, prior to that, you were doing mostly higher intensity speed style training, and you are getting into more of a base phase. Maybe you realize that you forgot the base phase and you're going back and you're doing things right, which I commend you for. You are doing things right. Will you lose a little bit of speed during this time? So for example, if you test your 5 mile before you start doing it, and you test your 5 mile right after, before you get into like your speed phase, start doing speed work, you might be a little bit slower. However, strides are very, very underrated, and you can do strides. I wouldn't, if you're brand new to running and you've never run before, I wouldn't recommend strides in your first couple weeks of your base phase. You should just run slow, work on that zone 2. But during a base phase, you can absolutely add strides in. You could also add hill strides, like slight incline strides, not hill sprints, not like going balls to the wall for a minute on end, but just some nice, easy, a little higher than your zone 2 pace, your easy run pace, maybe at like a goal tempo pace or something along those lines, where you maybe start with 6 strides for your first session. And I've talked about strides quite a bit recently. Essentially what a stride is, you can do it on its own day. You can do it after a run. You can even do it before runs. I love strides like before speed work session. If they're super simple, you just start in a nice little jog, 15 to 20 yards, speed up to not a sprint. That's the huge part. They're not full all out sprints. They're, like I said, a tempo pace, give or take. Hold that pace for 60 to 80, maybe 100 yards, slow back down to a jog, rest as needed, and repeat. They allow you to continue to experience that adaptation, that ability to run at a faster rate, but they're way, way, way less fatiguing than going and running 200 meter repeats or 400 meter repeats or 800 meter repeats. A lot of very high level runners, professional runners in the off season, they run primarily easy zone 2 runs, and they do strides. They might do an occasional tempo run or something along those lines, but they're not doing mile repeats. They're not doing, if they're marathon runners, they're not doing like 5K repeats or anything like that. They're running along, building up that volume, building up that capacity, getting their body really good at using fat for fuel, developing that mitochondria in the musculature. All that stuff is going to provide you the base for when you start to do a more speed focused phase. And even if, like I said, you might be a little bit slower when you first start your speed phase after you build this base up, but your body's going to feel better. You're going to feel better recovered, and you're going to be very much primed to perform. You're going to have that, think of it as a pyramid. You're going to be, your bottom of your pyramid is going to be filled in. And that's when you can start building upon that and doing some more speed work. And sometimes you have to take a step back or 2 steps back in order to allow yourself in the future to take several steps forward. And again, I commend you for realizing that you didn't really have a base and you are cutting it back and doing it the right way, slowly building your volume up of mostly easy running, a little bit of strides, but you are increasing your potential not only to run faster in the future, but also stay uninjured or mitigate your risks of injury compared to if you didn't do that. So that would be my take on that. That would be my best advice. John, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Speed, similar to strength, is something that takes a long time to develop. Sounds like this guy has been spending a lot of time with those harder intervals and tempo runs. So assuming he has a pretty solid speed base, it takes a while to develop, but it is relatively easy to maintain when you have it, right? Especially if you're still getting the economy of motion and still building up your aerobic base, that's going to influence that overall pacing. The big thing I would say is be disciplined and be patient with the aerobic training. A lot of guys that come from a background like myself, where you primarily do a lot of high intensity anaerobic conditioning, are predisposed or a little bit underdeveloped on the aerobic conditioning side, and your pace might be super slow. So even if you're going out there and you're running your tempo runs and your interval runs at a 6-minute pace right now, you might go out there and go zone 2 and realize your zone 2 pace is like 14 minutes. And guys coming from that anaerobic background usually look at that and they're like, this is completely
big hit to the ego.
yeah, exactly. So be patient with it, be disciplined with it, and understand that the more disciplined you are with that, with those those aerobic sessions, the faster that progress is going to come. If you take those sessions and you turn those strides into a tempo run and finish out the last 10-15 minutes of that zone 2 session at a tempo pace, you're completely undermining it, and you're not going to get the aerobic benefits that you're really looking for. One thing I would say is strides and the long zone 2 runs are absolutely great. Pickups are good too. But I would still supplement some anaerobic conditioning on the side. Obviously, we don't know your whole training plan. You're working up to 30 miles per week, which is a decent amount of mileage. I would still include some type of low impact conditioning. This can be at the very end of a strength session, and keep it really short. So kind of like what we talked about with the last guy, 5-8 minutes, 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off for 8 rounds on the assault bike is still going to give you that, your body, the ability to process that lactate and give you exposure to that burn and get conditioned to clearing it out or saving it and still performing at those high intensities or the higher heart rate zones. But yeah, if you're taking a step back, focusing primarily on those slow miles and building up your aerobic base, which is something I personally had to do when I started really focusing on the endurance capacity. Just takes patience, but it's absolutely the right call.
Yeah, that zone 2 pace thing, I sound like a broken record at this point, talking about how little it matters. There are professional marathon runners that run 440 miles for 26 miles in a row, and a lot of them do their easy runs at 9-minute pace. If it was a proxy, some guys also do their easier runs at a 7-minute pace or 7:30 pace. But if it was a really good proxy for your potential running ability at, say, a 5-mile or a 2-mile, which is likely what you're trying to get good at, you're not going to be entering a zone 2 pace competition, I don't think, unless there's an inaugural zone 2 pace competition coming up that I don't know about. So what really matters is your time trial runs. And if you have to run really slow in order to stay in that aerobic zone, then so be it. No one really cares. Stay off Strava. Don't compare yourself to other people. Just stick with it. If you have to walk a little bit, and this goes for anyone, maybe not this guy, he might not have to, but he might. And it goes for anyone. You are better off walking periodically in order to stay in that zone 2 pace than just continuing to push a little higher because you look down at your watch and you're a little bit upset with your current pace at that aerobic effort. So, and I really like the inclusion of the non-impact stuff, the rower repeats or the bike repeats or something along those lines. When I have guys that come to me who start with very little run base, we will build the running base with mostly easy stuff. We will throw in some strides and some hills, but all of the higher intensity stuff occurs either on an air bike or a rower. We'll do 250-meter repeats or whatever it may be on a rower, or we'll do, like John said, 20 seconds on, a minute or two off. That way you're still getting that, but you're also not beating your joints up. You're probably going to feel great. You can do more. I'm not saying you should do this, but you can do more volume of non-impact conditioning than running, even if you are not very conditioned for it. You're not going to be as good at it if you don't do it very often, but it's still going to beat you up. It'll be more fatiguing acutely in the session because you're just not adapted to it. Like if you've been running for a really long time and you hop on an assault bike, you think you're in really good shape, you hop on an assault bike, or even worse, an echo bike, which has more resistance, it's harder. You might find that you're not very good at biking. You might find that your legs start burning a lot because you don't have the specific muscular endurance for that bike before your heart rate really even gets up. And that's not because you're not in shape. It's just because you've been training something different. So you're getting a lot of fatigue acutely. You're going to feel really tired, out of breath, etc. But you're fatiguing yourself in it from a recovery standpoint, more of a macro standpoint, long term. It's the same with like hill repeats. A lot of people will think like hill repeats, because they're so hard, are more stressful on the body than running flat repeats, which is not the case. The hill has many different things built into it that makes it a less stressful and a better option for a lot of people. Even if you feel really, really smoked at the end, it's less impact. It naturally slows you down. It naturally shortens your stride. So it can be a very beneficial thing, especially when you're first starting with speed work. Instead of launching when you're finished with this phase, instead of launching into like day one, 5/800s or something like that, do some longer hill repeats, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute hill repeats, where you're going not all out, not hill sprints. There's a difference between repeats in an endurance context and sprints in a sprinter context. There's a big difference. I made a YouTube video about this recently. So just keep that in mind. Repeats means, guess what? You should be able to repeat every single time. But either way, we're kind of getting on a tangent here. At least I am. So let's hop into the next question. This is a good one. I get this question a lot. I'm sure you do too. What are some ideas for an 18 X-ray to stay fit from OSIT to selection? Quote unquote, go and fit and then get back in shape is a great starting point, but I'm trying to game an actual plan or some ideas to get some extra reps. Hope you and John can give some insight. Thanks for everything you both are doing for the community. Of course, man. Go ahead,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, appreciate you, man. Appreciate the question. We've had some guys recently. They just got to brag. A couple of them passed or just got through SFPC. So pretty fresh on like what their experience was. They came in with a pretty high level of fitness, and all of them kind of lost a little bit of their fitness level, right? And I'm sure you can agree, if you come in with a high level of fitness, you can expect to lose a little bit. If you come with a very low level of fitness, you can expect to gain a little bit. I personally went in there with a pretty slow run time, and I got my run time faster. So depending on where you're currently at, will kind of dictate what that experience looks like for you. With it, basic isn't too bad. Really kind of where it starts to suck in regards to losing a lot of performance is OSIT. You're going to be primarily focused on infantry tactics. You're going to be spending time out in the woods. You're going to be eating MREs, not sleeping, a lot of those things, which is going to affect your recovery. It's going to affect your nutrition and subsequently your performance. So understand that it's going to be a suboptimal environment for you to even make progress or maintain those gains that you had, but that still means that you still want to take advantage of the time you do have now. In regards to specificity with a plan while you're there, use what you have. A lot of guys that I've talked to, maybe in their bay, they have kettlebells or dumbbells. These guys, in their case, had kettlebells kind of in their back room. So they were doing a lot of kettlebell work. Also, this is a good time to work on your calisthenics, work on your push-ups, your pull-ups, and try to boost those numbers. You're not going to be able to get heavy enough really loads to train in that optimal rep range for strength 1 to 5 and get good stimulus from the strength component. So I would use that time to focus on getting those push-ups up, getting those pull-ups up, kind of understanding that you might lose a little bit of strength in that time, but you can regain it after that time. But if you come back out with solid push-ups, solid pull-ups, your plank's really good, your numbers with that are looking solid, then you're going to be in a good spot once you get to Airborne. I know I saw your notes. You have a really, really good point that I have not thought of. So I want to hear your answer, Kevin.
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned it earlier. Pretty much everybody who has ever gone to OSIT with the intention of going the 18 X-ray route has felt exactly the same thing that you're feeling. And with that, lots of people end up still being successful at selection. So although it is not the optimal, say, for example, day one of OSIT, the timeline, I'm not exactly sure what it is these days, but say day one of OSIT, say day one of basic is 8 months out from selection. A lot of people think that they're going to OSIT and they're like, if I go to OSIT at this fitness level, like this is going to be it. I'm not going to get any more fit from here on out. And that's not the case. It's going to fluctuate. You're going to go, like he said, once you start OSIT, there's going to be a lot less actual structured PT that you guys go do. Even the structured PT, they try to break it into ability groups, but it's still not perfect, but it's enough to kind of like maintain at least. Once you get into OSIT, you're a little bit more on your own. You're going to be a little bit more, you're going to have to be a little bit more creative and figure some things out. That being said, even if you don't really do anything all that much at OSIT, I'm not recommending this. Once you get done with OSIT, you start Airborne school, you go to Airborne school, then you have however many months between Airborne and SOPSI. SOPSI, you want to go, I always say, go into SOPSI as if it was day one of selection, because you might gain a little bit of fitness at SOPSI. The value of SOPSI is getting used to actually being at McCall. Now that it's back at McCall, at least I think it is.
Yeah.
And also learning how to land nav and kind of learning what the structure, even though SOPSI doesn't look that much like selection, it's at least a similar environment, and you get more sleep, you get more food, it's less stressful, but at the same time, you're doing a lot of selection-like things at SOPSI. But I would say, instead of not doing anything during OSIT, which I said you could, I still wouldn't recommend that. Worst case scenario, you most likely will have kettlebells. You most likely will have maybe some dumbbells, something along those lines. Some bays I have heard even have like more of a prison gym where you can use actual like dumbbells, barbells, and things like that. I wouldn't count on that. I would say the more comfortable you are looking like a goober, the better. So what does that mean? Doing a bunch of pogo hops. One of the biggest things that gets guys after OSIT, going into Airborne, going into pre-SOPSI, is the sudden ramp up of running mileage. So if you're not someone that has a big time running background, usually someone with a big running background that has a lot, like really high mileage going into basic, when they bounce back into a high, they just have the capacity to ramp their mileage up faster afterwards than someone who doesn't. So being able to maintain the adaptations of the impact component of running by doing pogo hops, believe it or not, running in place. I've even heard of guys running laps around the inside of their bay. Yeah, you're going to look like an absolute goober. But guess what? You are further enhancing your potential preparedness when you get out of there, and also decreasing your injury risk when you start getting into these higher mileages that you're probably going to get just launched into in pre-SOPSI. Additionally, some mistakes that probably a lot of people make that I wouldn't suggest making. A lot of people will think, okay, impact, that means jumping, that means plyometrics, that means high rep plyometrics. And no, that is not necessarily the case. I mentioned pogo hops. Pogo hops are fine to do for high reps. You can do pogo hops if you work your way up to it. Pogo hops, literally, for those who don't know, you straighten your legs out and you're just jumping up off your toes, and you're using your arms to kind of get up, but you're not, unless you're a freak of nature, you're not jumping all that high. And if you are a freak of nature, you're probably going to be used to jumping high and landing anyway. So aside from that, if you're doing squat jumps, or if you're doing broad jumps, or if you're doing skips you can do for a little higher reps. But when you think plyometrics, don't think I want to do these for cardio. And burpees is another favorite of a lot of people too. Nothing wrong with some burpees, but I've heard of guys doing like hundreds and hundreds of burpees every single day in addition to their SF prep. And it's just totally arbitrary, and it's going to fatigue you. Burpees are a really good exercise to induce fatigue. They're a very lazy trainer exercise that's like, I can't think of anything, but I want to make you feel like you worked hard, and I want to make you feel tired. So let's just do burpees. And you watch most people do burpees, and they're super ugly. They bang people's shoulders up. They do these half-ass jumps. You're basically doing a little bit more than nothing, but not in a very beneficial way. So all that to say, run in place. You can run in place. If you do it a few times per day, you don't have to run in place for 30 minutes straight, 45 minutes straight. But if you can build a habit of a few days a week running in place or running around the inside of your bay, doing some pogo hops, if you have a kettlebell, doing some kettlebell swings, you can do some high rep kettlebell swings, especially if it's a lighter kettlebell. Kettlebells aren't going to make you great at running, but they're going to at least keep you used to using your, like developing your aerobic system and your anaerobic system. So you can also do more advanced kettlebell stuff. You can do clean snatches if you're proficient with them, but I would keep it very simple. And like John said, definitely work on your calisthenics. Might as well just become a push-up and calisthenic monster. You can work on pacing your push-ups. A lot of people mess up their push-up pacing, especially if you're used to the old push-ups where you can use momentum to kind of do a lot more reps on the non-chest release or hand release push-ups. The hand release push-ups is totally different. There's an art to it. You got to slow down. A lot of people will just do like a shit ton of push-ups to start out and then they burn out. If you think about a hand release push-up, the only time you're resting is when your chest is on the floor. So if you get this really good 1 rep per 1.5 seconds, 1.75 seconds, and you just maintain that, you could do a rep every 2 seconds and you'd get 60. You would max it out. So a little bit of buffer room. Say you're doing a set of 30. If you get that set done in 45, maybe 50 seconds or so, you don't have to count every single rep. Like how long did that rep take? But a set of 30 in 45 seconds, that's 1 rep every second and a half. And I'm not even that good at math. I'm pretty sure that's right. So little things like that. And then also another huge one I wanted to touch on is once you get done with OSIT, you're going to have to do some airborne shuffle runs and things like that. But like those are not very strenuous or anything like that. You will see people fall out, which is kind of funny, but you'll have at least on some days of airborne school, some days are going to be ridiculous marathon days and trying to get training in, even though I did it, I still wouldn't recommend it. Like I wasn't really getting much out of those training sessions when we would just work 14, 15, 16 hours a day and I would train. But you're going to have other days they're more manageable and you should be able to get some sessions in. Go to the gym, build your strength back up, but most importantly, start building that mileage up. You can do mostly easy runs. Like I said, you can do some strides. Take advantage of the weekends as well. A lot of people, including me, would go out and party on weekends, and that would not be necessarily what I recommend. You're going to have weekends off. If you go sometime with a 4-day holiday, usually they do 4-day weekends or at least 3-day weekends. You can get some really good, solid long runs and or rucks in on the weekend days and really take advantage of that time. So I think that, of course, this is a valid concern, but it is something that everyone's faced, and you just got to make do with what you got and make the best of the situation. And just know that, lots of x-rays have been getting selected for years and years and years and decades. And it is not optimal, but it is still, honestly, most x-rays have a more optimal prep than most other people because literally they are just given all the tools. It's not the best programming. It's not perfect, but it is way better than being in a line unit and you have a crazy schedule or your command doesn't support you and they make you do CQ or staff duty all the time. They make you go to the field, whatever it may be. So x-rays got it made, and there's a reason that x-rays have the highest selection rate of the people that actually go to selection. The overall selection rate, don't let that fool you. But like if you actually make it to selection, you have a really good chance because you're going to be at an advantage compared to some of the other guys. So anything else to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to send you to selection unless you're physically ready. At the end of SOPC right now, they're doing basically a gate week. You're doing a 12-mile ruck. You're doing all of your gated events. And if you do not pass it, you don't go to selection. So you just get rolled into the next SOPC class. So
Interesting.
yeah, don't stress right now the like losing maybe a little bit of strength or a little bit of running capacity inside of OSIT. You're not going to lose so much that it's going to be huge. The thing that I wanted to stress that Kevin brought up, and I saw in the notes, I was like, damn, that's good. I'm stealing that. Is the pogo hops at basic. Do those because a lot of guys, you'll see them. They're kind of pent up during OSIT. Then they get out of OSIT. They get to Airborne, or they get to, they finally get to brag and get some time to train, and they ramp up the mileage super quickly and develop injuries from it. So pogo hops to develop that resiliency in the lower legs, and if you are someone that comes from a background of shin splints or plantar fasciitis, things like that, that can really limit it. So you can ramp up a little bit faster. But overall, man, like I came from kind of the prior service side of the house, and I always tell guys that going 18x is your best chance to get selected. Kevin brought it up, but a lot of the other guys that you'll see at selection that are coming from prior service, they just did a really imperfect prep. Maybe they spent a month out at JRTC down in Louisiana or NTC, and they fought through that entire thing, and they're still there, ready to perform. So with anything in the military, you're going to have to fight through a lot of challenges. So instead of dwelling on how difficult it is to make progress or that you lose 5-10 seconds off your run time, just commit to the process and understand that it is the best chance to get selected.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, let's hop into the next question. Can strongman style lifting be a better way to prepare for the demands of SFAS and SOF opposed to powerlifting and bodybuilding style splits? The nature of the job seems much more aligned with the functional strength that would be coming from strongman, as opposed to the raw strength from powerlifting that might not have as much of a carryover. Interesting question. I will start giving my thoughts on this one. All right, so let's talk about functional. If you haven't listened to some of my recent episodes, I've talked about the functional thing for a while. A lot of people think that unless an exercise mimics something that you're going to be doing in daily life, or in this case, something you're going to be doing at selection, or something you're going to be doing as a SOF operator, then it's not functional. And that is not the case. Anything that makes you stronger, more muscular, more mobile, better at endurance, faster, quicker, able to produce more power is going to be functional, even if it doesn't perfectly mimic real life. Like a lot of people will say, oh, farmers carries are so functional because of carrying groceries to the car. When have you ever had that much of a emotional event carrying groceries from the car? Farmers carries are great. Don't get me wrong. You should definitely do farmers carries for selection, or if you like to carry groceries or whatever, but it doesn't have to mimic what you do on a daily basis. And it doesn't have to mimic exactly what you are going to be doing at selection or in SOF. We'll keep this as more of a selection based question, because we'll get into actually one of the next ones is the differences between selection prep and general SOF prep. So that being said, strongman work, we talked about it a little earlier. Very, very good idea. But should all of your training be strongman work? No, because even strongmen, the strongest strongmen in the world, professional strongmen, the brunt of their training is basic. Maybe not basic. It could be a little bit unconventional. They might use some specialty bars and different equipment, but it's basic strength building training. A lot of people think strongmen, CrossFitters, all they do is strongman workouts, and all the CrossFitters do is just CrossFit WODs. The best ones in the world absolutely do those workouts, but they are not their main. They have their main primary basic lifts, presses, pulls, hinges, etc. And then they do strongman work as more of a skill development, work capacity, and specificity thing. So usually what I suggest is to do something similar like that. Lift weights, basic movements. You don't have to get super fancy with them. You want to gain strength. You want to gain, if you're smaller, you might want to gain some muscle. Oftentimes at lower levels, the two come hand in hand. That way you have that good solid foundation of strength from which to improve your durability, improve your ability to pick up all the things that you're going to be doing in the strongman work. And once you get to team week and you're actually doing strongman style events, if all you do is just strongman work, it kind of breaks most of the laws of actual strength training and getting stronger in muscular development. The eccentric component of a lift, the concentric component of a lift, it's a lot more, I guess, isometric style training, which there's nothing wrong with, but only training like this, you're leaving a lot of gains on the table in regards to overall capacity, strength, mobility as well. One of the most underrated aspects of strength training with a full range of motion is improved mobility. Being stronger will also make you more injury resistant in your running and your rucking. So generally, I would have a foundation of strength work, whether it's while you're getting closer to selection. Usually I have my guys do 2 full body days, Monday, Wednesday, and then Friday is typically a calisthenics and strongman day. So they do, calisthenics, maybe some tibialis raises, some calf raises, and then we do a strongman workout to prep for team week. And then on the strength days, towards the end of those training sessions, you don't necessarily have to do it at the end, but say you're doing a upper body biased full body day on Monday, you can throw in some carries at the end. whether it's a single arm carry, a suitcase carry, farmer's carries. You can do sandbag carries, like in a Zercher position, over the shoulder carries, whatever it is. Very brief, not a full strongman workout. And then same thing for Tuesday. Maybe Tuesday you do some sled drags, either some lighter ones to warm up, backward sled drags to just get some blood flow down to the legs, or you do it towards the end. But it's, again, short. Like maybe you do some heavier, shorter sled pushes or something like that. Sleds are great because there's no eccentric, very minimal eccentric stress. And so you can build really good strength, and you can also use sleds for conditioning, of course, too. But you don't get really sore. You don't get really banged up. They're very, very low skill. It's super hard to hurt yourself. And then Friday is when you kind of combine all that together, and you don't have to do it exactly like this, but your strongman workout is longer, more intense, not all out balls to the wall, but maybe you do like 30-minute running clock where you do a bunch of different carries, drags, and different things like that. And that will develop your baseline foundation of strength, as well as allow you to put those things together and maybe test your strength capacity, your grip endurance, and things along those lines. So that's the way I would think of this. Just remember that functional definition. Anything that makes you fitter is going to be functional. If it makes you less fit, it's not really functional. So yeah. What do you got on that one, John?
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I largely agree. No, I mean, strongman lifts, when we talk about, I like to break it up into like the lifts and the carries, right? Because whenever we think of strongman, we see a guy with like a log bar doing a clean and press. I wouldn't, ever program something like that. If someone comes from a powerlifting background and has really good form with like a clean, then we can use it to build some power, but it's not going to be like the bulk of our programming, especially for selection prep. It's just not worth it. But strongman carries are absolutely really good, right? So our farmers carries, and we can go a lot heavier than some guys really do. Sometimes guys get used to carrying 45-pound dumbbells with for their farmers carries or whatever it is. I like to go a little bit heavier, especially if you have like some strongman style bars where you can load it with some plates, maybe get up to 120, 130 pounds per side. You can really get some good stimulus with it. It is going to be a little bit more fatigue causing, but from a component of like GPP or just building that resiliency and grip strength, it's really good. So strongman carries, farmers carries, the suitcase carries, front rack carries, sandbag carries, yoke carries are all going to be really good. And our programming is probably pretty similar. We do incorporate a lot of that stuff in there, but the majority of the strength training is more traditional lifting. Kevin already hit on it because you have that eccentric and that concentric part of the movement, and you're actually recruiting those muscle fibers and building those strength adaptations as opposed to just carrying the weight on a regular basis. So what I would do and what most of our guys do depends on the individual. I don't want to say like, I don't want to give like a blanket one, but we can do 3 strength sessions a week. Much like Kevin, he does 3, 2 primarily lifting focus and then 1 calisthenics and strongman work. And the bulk of those sessions, or like the beginning of the sessions, is focused on a primary lift. And I don't want to say like you have to back squat or you have to do this, but we want to build strength in the essential movement pattern. So the squat, the hinge, the vertical horizontal press, the vertical horizontal pull, carry, things like that. Those are going to be the primary focus of those initial movements. Then we hit some accessory work and then can move into some strongman work and then GPP. Working sleds is really great for the general strength or general conditioning, especially when we talk about rucking and building that leg power to carry that ruck up over hills, or once you get into SUT and you're throwing dudes on your back on top of your rucksack, all going to help tremendously with that. So biggest thing is, we obviously don't know what your plan looks like, but don't feel like you have to incorporate all of this stuff, right? We want to hit the essential movement patterns. I'm a big proponent of the 5-3-1 method. So week 1, primarily focusing on lower percentages, 5 reps, week 2, 3 reps, higher percentages, week 3, 1 rep, really high percentages. And then week 4 is your deload week. That's the majority of our programming from a strength component, and then working on GPP and accessory movements outside of that to support the training. But the biggest thing I always tell guys, and I think I saw a recent post of yours. It was kind of the satire one where where you like put them up and you said you have to hit a specific number on your
Yes.
bench or deadlift
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, what I tell my guys all the time is the gym is not the main event, right? Think about the
Love it.
gym as a method for us to support everything we want to do outside of it. A lot of times guys get wrapped around, if I can't get this 405 deadlift, I'm not going to get selected, blah, blah, blah. That's not the case at all. Look at the gym to get the specific stimulus or strength stimulus that's going to aid you in carrying a ruck better, in performing better, becoming more durable, so you don't get hurt out at land navigation. You don't get hurt while you're walking with a bunch of weight on your back out at team wake. So look at the gym like that, and you'll start to develop kind of that maturity in regards to the movements you want to incorporate.
Yeah, and I would say further out from selection, at least for most people, it depends on what your strengths and weaknesses are, your background and things like that. But further out from selection, that's when you want to kind of focus more on getting like strong and higher percentages, maybe, testing yourself a little bit more often in the weight room. And of course, not just completely foregoing your endurance stuff, but the closer you get, the more specific you want to be. So of course, strength training, even though you're not going to be actually lifting weights while you're at selection, there's no powerlifting competition. I say this all the time, but even though it's not a specific event that you're going to be training for, like most of your training should be focused on getting faster under a ruck, being able to go longer under a ruck, getting faster at running, doing your calisthenics, carries, etc. But that strength, like Jon said, is going to support all those things. It's going to make you more durable. It's going to make you stronger. It's going to give you better capacity to continue carrying that ruck, even though rucking is more of an endurance event than a strength event, but it's very unique in that it still involves a lot of strength. There are plenty of guys who can run 2.5-hour marathons that couldn't break the 3-hour mark on a 12-mile ruck because they just don't have the freaking strength for it. So super important to build that foundation, especially if you're on the weaker side, like really, really focus on that strength. And some guys, if you're just a freak of nature running and rucking, but you're still weak, yeah, you can strength train pretty heavy going into selection. But I usually, for most people, like to build most of that strength till they're about 3 months out, maybe 10 weeks out or so. And that's when I kind of tell my guys, all right, from here on out, the strength training you're doing is to support your running and your rucking and everything else that we have to be good at for selection. So if you're kind of erring on the side of like, ooh, should I test myself? Ooh, should I do this AMRAP? Ooh, should I go way higher percentage today? Is it going to affect my run tomorrow or my repeats tomorrow or my ruck tomorrow? If the answer is yes, then no, you probably shouldn't. So yeah, super important stuff.
That 3-month out period, we have a big emphasis on posterior chain strength, but like 3 months out, I'm not going to have someone go in there and do heavy deadlifts. The ROI is not there. It's not worth it. But I do see a lot of guys that are prepping for selection and they're trying to pull 405 or 500 pound deadlifts, a couple weeks out from selection. I'm like, it's not worth it.
Especially a straight bar deadlift. It's one thing if there's debate over whether a trap bar is going to be a little bit less dangerous than a straight bar. I would say in my experience, it is, just because, a lot of people aren't built for deadlifting with a straight bar, and yet they still do it. But yeah, you don't need to be,
or they don't do the proper bracing. They don't have
right.
The strength built up. Like that's one thing I kind of go off on a tangent here, but
no, you're good.
I really hammer to guys is there's so many people I see going to the gym and they just freaking rip, heavy ass deadlifts. And yeah, they have the muscular strength for it. Like your legs, for a lot of guys, legs are going to be strong enough to pull a heavy amount of weight. But unless you've like prepared, like your deadlifts look solid. I've seen you put them on your stories. Unless your deadlifts look like Kevin's here, you're putting yourself at risk if you're trying to pull too heavy too quick, especially close to selection where the deadlift doesn't matter. So for guys that like that, trap bar deadlift is usually a better option unless you really want to get specifically good at the straight bar deadlift. Trap bar is not like a true hinge.
It's more squatty.
Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid, but still in regards to building the posterior chain strength, you're going to get some stimulus there.
Yeah, I usually have my guys in the last few months, we switch away from the barbell deadlift. We'll usually have one of the main lifts on one of the days is a trap bar deadlift, but it's like sets of 4 to 6, very, very low RPE, 7 to 8 RPE. If you're feeling really good that day, maybe an 8. If you're feeling a little bit worse, 6. I would much rather you undershoot it than overshoot it. And that's a trap bar. It's just a lot more favorable for a lot of people. But yeah, either way, a little bit of a tangent. let's move into the next question. This one's going to be a good one. We will hopefully not make this an entire episode, but we'll keep it brief. So selection prep versus cube course prep versus team prep. As you have made clear, selection prep involves mainly endurance, running, and rucking with a strength component. How does this style of training differ from what will be needed to excel during the Q course, as well as once you get to a team? That's a really cool question. I'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, the biggest differences I like to talk about is selection. While it's not necessarily a sprint, still 3 weeks long, is much more of a sprint than the Q course. So it's going to be much more performance focused. We're going to be trying to get those run times really competitive. We still want to have a big emphasis on durability and things like that, but we can kind of go into like what you said, the like a peak phase, right? Like that peak performance in it. Once you get past that environment and you're in the Q course and eventually on a team, the biggest thing I like to tell guys is there's no more off season. You don't get to finish selection, and like in my case where I was in the 160th, I had a year between selection and Q course. Like that's never going to happen again. So the focus becomes much more on durability. That means maybe if you got a really high mileage per week going into selection, maybe we reduce that down a little bit. Maybe we hit a lot more accessory work, focus on imbalances, focus on any aches and pains that we might have. A lot of guys have, including myself, this is kind of what caused my back issue when I was on a team, is an imbalance in their hips, right? So hip strength, posterior strength, resiliency with the impact of rucking over long distances and periods of time are going to be the biggest components and the biggest difference in regards to training for selection versus training for the Q course and being on a team. The specific split doesn't need to change drastically. Like if you still want to, like, it depends on the guy, right? If it's someone that wants to improve on their run or wants to improve on their strength, then obviously the split would look a little bit different. But assuming somebody has pretty balanced performance overall, you don't need to go create a much different split than you did for selection as opposed to the Q course. Just the volume, the intensity, and the time you take to recover would go down a little bit, right? So what I like to do in pretty traditional, like Eastern European kind of strength work is that those 3 weeks of work and then followed by that 4th deload week. A lot of times, like it's from a fatigue standpoint, it might be too soon for some guys, right? Especially if you're a younger guy that has a high level of recoverability. You might not necessarily require that 4th deload week. You might be able to push it out to 6 or 8 weeks, but that's going to depend highly on your energy levels in an environment where you can't necessarily control that. I do like to program in those deload weeks a little bit more frequently to allow that recovery to take place. And taking those and being disciplined with it over a long period of time is really going to limit those injuries. Because if you continue to push it out too far and continue to try to do too much, yeah, you might be getting a couple extra reps, a couple extra training sessions in, but at what cost? And are you putting yourself in a position to where you get an injury and then you are, not able to help your team as much, or maybe you get hurt completely and your team goes on a deployment or goes on mission without you, right? So the focus is much, much more on durability, not just like peak performance because you're being assessed.
Yeah, totally agree with that. The way I look at selection is, even though it's 3 weeks, like Jon said, you are still training as if it's an event rather than training for the different events and daily things and weekly things that occur when you're in the Q course or when you're on a team. So even though it's not like you're training for an ultra marathon that's going to be 1 day, or maybe it's a long one in like 2 days, it still involves a general physical preparedness / base building phase when you're further out. Then when you get close, you want to make things more specific. And for selection, the specificity component is going to be highly focused on rucking, both ruck speed as well as, even more importantly, ruck endurance, just the ability to do it day after day after day at a relatively slow, yet it's still demanding just because of the duration of it, because of the ruck weight pace. And also, you'll kind of ramp that intensity up, you'll ramp that volume up as you get close to selection, also known as peaking. And then you will, hopefully, if you're doing it right, taper a little bit, allow that fatigue to go away, allow those fitness levels to stay really high. The fatigue, if you finish your peaking phase for selection and you're actually doing things right, your fatigue and your fitness levels are going to be pretty similar. This is what gets a lot of people messed up, is they won't make weekly improvements as they're peaking. If you're peaking properly you're not going to make improvements every single time because it's like a neck and neck race of like fatigue and fitness levels. But when you finish your peak and you dial things back for the last, 10 days, 14 days, 7 days, whatever, there's a lot of different ways to taper. That fatigue goes away way faster than fitness will. And you're also not just taking time out. Like tapering, if you do it right, there's an art to it, but you're not just stopping all fitness. But even if you were, fitness gains don't go away that fast. The only thing that really goes away super fast is power, which is one of the least important aspects of being prepped for selection. So you're doing a little bit of training just to keep like your calisthenics up. You're doing some runs, maybe some pickups, maybe some strides just to continue being used to running faster. But that fatigue just goes way, way down. And you show up to selection super duper fit, hopefully low fatigue, not banged up, mentally ready, because being super fatigued from your training also kind of bleeds into the mentality as well. And also you're just going to be mentally stressed because you're about to go to selection. So it's like you're training for an event with a lot of specific fitness disciplines rather than in the Q course, you are going to be fluctuating. Your fitness is going to fluctuate a lot in the Q course because you're going to go out to Camp McCall for 6 weeks, 8 weeks or whatever. And yeah, you're not going to be like deloading and resting, but you're just going to be rucking a lot. You're not going to be sleeping great. You're not going to have the best nutrition. So your fitness levels are going to go down during that period of time. You're going to go out to sear. Sear's not a deload either. You're going several days without food towards the end. So you're going to come back and you're going to be a little bit less fit. The big thing that I like to recommend, John kind of hit on all the things I wanted to touch on for the actual fitness maintenance aspect of it. But a big mistake a lot of people make, actually, we are going to hit on one more thing during language. But a big mistake people make throughout the Q course is they will come back from a field event or they'll come back from a place where they are not able to train the way they're normally training. And they'll be a little depleted. For example, SEER school or SUT, you're in a stressed out state, even though you haven't been training a ton. And they will they'll be like, oh man, I got a lot of ground to make up. So I'm going to crank up the volume and the intensity right away to make up for all this time that I didn't train. And that is not a good idea. You want to ease back into it. I didn't do this. I'm not saying that I did this, but I highly suggest doing that because you're better off underestimating and like really dialing things back and easing back into it, even for 5 days, 6 days, a week, 2 weeks, than you are having that mindset of like, I need to make up for this, or I'm a piece of shit. I just didn't train for 8 weeks when you didn't even have an option to. But people will play some weird game with themselves and have some weird self-talk, like somehow blame themselves for going out to SUT and passing SUT and not training. And they'll try and make up for it. They'll launch back into it. And that is usually best case scenario. You are going to be super sore, super fatigued, super banged up. You're going to detract from your ability to regain the fitness that you want to regain. Worst case scenario, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to get rolled back part of the Q course or something along those lines. So definitely ease back into things. Also, language. Language is the part of the Q course the only part of the Q course, give or take, where you can put a solid half a year straight of consistent training in. So you're going to class from, I want to say when we went, it was like 8 to 3 or 8 to 4, something along those lines. When I was there was very little required PT, especially if you got a good enough score on what I would assume they probably do the ACFT now. If you get a whatever score in the ACFT, every time you guys take it, then you get to do PT on your own. And if you don't, then you might have to do some more structured PT. But 2 huge mistakes that a lot of people make in language. One, they don't take advantage of the extra time and they don't do any extra training themselves. And they show up to group really fit, fat, unfit, not ready to actually go and perform with the team. Or they do train, but they go to Steers in Fayetteville and they get their favorite SARM or pro hormone or whatever it may be. You have no idea what that shit is. It could be any different thing that probably isn't actually what they're saying it is. And they go on it and it results in a shit ton of muscle gain. Blood pressure goes way up, get super jacked. Liver markers, lipid markers just go all out of whack. So you're basically putting a foreign substance, you have no idea what it is, in your body in order to get super jacked, because a lot of people will think, oh, I need to be a Green Beret. That means I have to look super jacked. And they end up getting really jacked. And this happened to multiple people in my class. And they failed the 2 mile run. and they got rolled back into the next class just because they wanted to get super jacked and super strong, and it completely destroyed their conditioning. So those are the two main mistakes not to make in the queue. And you don't have to be a freak of nature. Like I said earlier, you want to show up as fit as you can be, but you don't have to look like Captain America. You don't have to be you don't have to be deadlifting 600 pounds. You don't have to be squatting 500 pounds. Just very balanced, like Jon said, a few days a week lifting. You can do the deload thing. Oftentimes, he mentioned the deloads. Oftentimes the Q course just throws deloads at you because you're, training for a few weeks and then you go out to a detail or whatever it may be. Not necessarily a deload, like you're not getting recovery from that, but you can definitely auto-regulate a little bit. If you normally take a deload every 4 weeks, but next week you're going out to the field for 5 days, like you could train that week, and you could overreach a little bit going into that, just knowing that you're not going to train for 7 days. That takes a little skill. It takes a little bit of humility and not being dumb with it, but that's kind of the way I did it. And then you take 5-7 days off because you have to, and then you come back and then again ease back into it. So yeah, really cool question. Definitely something I might actually make a full podcast episode on that in the future. But yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything. All right, let's wrap it up with one more question. What do both of you think is the biggest predictor for success among selection candidates? All right, I'll start with this one. Of course, physical fitness is the least negotiable aspect of it. If you cannot meet the standards are pretty, I've talked about it a million times. I'm sure Jon has. There are by the book standards, and there are, standards to kind of shoot for if you really want to feel confident and peace of mind going in. But physical fitness, in particular, rucking, you're going to be rucking more than anything else at selection. If you can't ruck day after day after day after day, you don't necessarily have to go on ruck runs, 12-mile rucks, 8-mile rucks as fast as you possibly can every day, but you have to put your ruck on every single day and continue to move. And you have to think and you have to act properly with your ruck on. You have to make good decisions. You have to pay attention to detail. So fitness in general, but especially rucking, is the least negotiable aspect of it. However, you could show up and be the fittest person in your class. You could win every gate during gate week. You could do tons and tons of push-ups, pull-ups. You could crush the obstacle course like in your sleep. But if you are either very unskilled at land nav, or if you are a dick and not a good team player, then you're not going to make it. So I would say, of course, the skill stuff, that's pretty objective. Like you have to be good enough and comfortable enough with land nav, which a huge one. I talked a lot about it in the last episode. Going confident, and to become confident, you have to become competent, and to become competent, you have to practice. You can read all about it if you want. You can learn all the terminology, but the best way to get good at land nav is to actually do it. So orienteering, you go to Jon's course. TF Voodoo has a really good one here at Fort Bragg. If you're in the military, you can go to 5th RTB. You can look into going to 5th RTB where they do Mountain Phase of Ranger School, and you can go practice down there. Worst case scenario, you go on your own. Just make sure you give someone a really good gatwa. Let them know where you're going, when you're coming back, how long you're going to be, where to find you, how to contact you, all that kind of stuff. So you're not the subject of a Hands Across America search party. That absolutely, I guarantee, has happened several times to people, prospective selection candidates. So you want to be skilled enough at that. Another really simple thing to teach yourself is tying knots. Being able to tie knots is pretty simple. You can just get some rope and practice on your own. You don't have to be like a knot master, but be able to tie basic knots, a bowline knot, a square knot, girth hitch, things like that. And those are pretty objective, easy skills to build. So if you show up without those, that's usually like a lack of personal responsibility thing. If you go to selection and you're not a knot master, I wasn't. So you're probably going to be okay because there's going to be other guys in your team as long as you make up for it during team week by being another, like an asset to your team somehow. As far as character, I would say confidence is massive. Just being confident in yourself, not cocky, but confident in your ability and not always second guessing yourself, especially out loud around other people. Competence, of course, we kind of just talked about that, but presence, just, you don't necessarily have to be a super vocal individual. You don't have to be someone who comes up with all these amazing ideas. You don't have to be like the brains necessarily. You don't even have to be the strong ranger, although it helps to be the strong ranger, but you don't have to be. As long as you have the, Jon was talking about earlier, the presence of mind, as well as just the presence around other people, interpersonal skills. It's kind of an intangible thing, but it can be worked on. especially if you're able to identify what some of your weaknesses are. Like if you go and talk to someone who's really close to you, your wife or something like that, hey, what are my weaknesses? And she says, you're kind of awkward around people. Guess what? You can go buy 10 books on how to fix being awkward around people. And every book that you read is probably going to have 10 different activities that you can go do and practice and put yourself in what's going to be very uncomfortable situations in order to be more comfortable around people. So humility, of course, you want to be confident in yourself, but you don't want to be cocky. You don't want to think you're the shit. You don't want to go in overconfident and then you go into land nav and you think you got it made and then you go 0 for 4 on the first night. That's not great. And then just being generally aware, situational awareness is huge. And it's something a lot of people lack these days because most people are living in their 6x2 inch box life on their phones all the time. And just being aware of other people around you, the environment around you, looking around, seeing like, what can I do right now? I'm talking more like team week. What can I do right now to enhance the team's operability? What can I do right now to give someone else on my team some assistance in order to finish this event sooner? How can I help someone else? Being aware like that and not just like stuck in your own little 2x2 foot bubble and just thinking about how miserable you are and how bad you want to go home and how bad your feet hurt and is this going to end? It's going to end eventually, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it's going to end. So I would say those are some of the bigger character and just personal traits to develop and consider developing. But I think that that's a huge activity that a lot of people, including myself, never really think of, or I didn't think of it back then, is going to someone close to you, your mom, your sister, your best buddy, your wife, husband, whatever, and asking them, what are some of my character flaws? Just be honest with me. And being able to identify them is huge because during team week, when you're stressed, tired, hungry, sore, banged up, your character flaws that may be pretty tame and not super problematic most of the time are going to be magnified. They're going to be way, way, way more apparent. And the cadre will notice, your teammates will notice, and it's just not a good look. So I would say that was quite a few, but that would be some things to start considering is building those traits and those skills.
Yeah, I want to touch on the character flaw one. That's something I have my guys do that maybe the guys that are a little bit more awkward or maybe have a little bit of social anxiety, things like that, is get the books, read the books, but you're not just like binging the information. You're looking for gold nuggets that you can actively implement into your life. Take notes on the book, write things down, create a plan to start implementing. If you're just reading, then it's it's entertainment, right?
Yep.
So look for ways to actually implement those things. And then also like when you're asking people about like your expanders, right? This is why we establish those people, those trusted people who are going to give us constructive feedback. When we're having those conversations with them, like kind of dig into it. If your wife says maybe you're socially awkward, look at like what somebody who Alex or Mosey talks about this quite a bit, but look at somebody who has a high level of charisma. What did they do? Oh, they look at them in the eyes. They nod when people are talking. They their shoulders are facing the person that they're talking. They're giving them attention. They're not kind of trying to leave the conversation. Like those things make someone charismatic. So like break it down into the things that you can incorporate into those conversations, because it's not just what you do during team week that impacts how you're peered, right? It's also what you do in the bay. How do you talk to people? Who are you? They're going to remember that type of stuff. I remember when I was in selection, you get a lot of downtime, something I did not expect during those first couple weeks, and even a little bit of downtime during team week. And you'll have kind of those groups of people that are talking, they're getting to know each other, they're hearing each other's backgrounds. Then you also have other guys that are sitting on the other side of the bay between the bunks, just staring at the floor or something. Like, don't be one of those guys. You don't have to be a class clown, but just engage in conversation, get to know people. That's going to help you feel more comfortable when you get out to team week and you're in that leadership position, as opposed to getting put in a leadership position and now this guy is somebody I don't know. I've never had a conversation with him. I have nothing to go on. Then you can be in a position where you come off a little bit differently than you want to, right? So I'll go back to the land nav a little bit. What I always tell guys is you don't need to be a land nav expert. You don't need to, be a professional with a map and compass, but you do have to feel comfortable in the woods. Like they're going to teach you everything you need to know about how to plot points, how to shoot an azimuth, how to do resection, intersection, all that type of stuff. Like the land nav classes there are really good. Nobody goes out there and fails due to a lack of knowledge. They fail because they get into a scenario. Maybe it's the first time they've been in the woods at nighttime, and they start to freak out and make a bad situation worse by making a bad decision. I came from the city. I did not do any land nav, nothing growing up. But luckily, when I was 19 years old at my first duty station, I got obsessed with hunting and I started spending a lot more time in the outdoors. So not saying you need to go hunting, but even if you have a group of friends that wants to go camping or wants to go on a hike and maybe you go off trail, look up shed hunting, where you like every year deer drop their antlers. You can go walk around the woods and find them legally. Like those things are going to build your comfortability in the woods. And then when you pair that with expert land nav advice, you perform really well. Also, don't go into selection if you are someone that comes from the sticks or you are someone that comes from a land nav background. Don't go into selection thinking you know it all. Like those cadre have trained and taught hundreds and hundreds of other selection candidates. They know the course, they know what it takes to get you selected. So listen to what they say about that specific course and then go implement it. In a team week environment, confidence is huge, but I kind of want to reinforce that you don't need to necessarily feel confident.
Very true.
I bring this back to my particular, like how I am today. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff I do where I don't feel confident, right? I'm kind of a person that has a lot of social anxiety naturally. So there's a lot of situations where I don't necessarily feel confident, but I look at, what confident people do or what I do when I do feel confident. I try to do that on a consistent basis, regardless of the situation. So I'm still going to stand tall. I'm still going to show people respect, have conversations. I'm not going to speak timidly. If I have something come up, I'm going to voice my opinion. And even if you don't search for this feeling or this magical click that you're going to just feel confident, just do the things that confident people do, right? Kind of a weird way to put it, but
Yeah, I would just, not to cut you off, but that one's huge because even if you have to have a little bit of false bravado to like make yourself seem confident, even if you don't feel it, the more often you do that and realize that nothing bad happened and you got through to the other side and other people may show signs of the fact that they think you're confident, you create more evidence that even if you're not 100% confident, that actually like kind of in a roundabout way builds your confidence in the future because you have this pile of evidence next to you that you can indeed, even if you're not feeling great, make people think that you are confident. And it kind of makes you think yourself that you're confident. And it's kind of like this weird, intricate way to develop confidence, whether you feel a shit ton of confidence or you really don't. So really good point.
It's a positive feedback loop because I'm someone that I perform really well kind of on my own. Like I can be really disciplined, but when I get in social situations, I don't always feel confident, but I kind of lean on all of the things that I do when I'm by myself, and it demonstrates as I'm coming across as confident, right? So and with that, like a lot of guys, you brought up something kind of that degrading talk, especially out loud. Like never do that. Nobody gives a crap about you.
You could say it, dude. No one gives a fuck.
Nobody gives a shit about you. Like everyone is there to pass their selection, right? Everyone wants them to pass. So like you going to somebody and complaining about how bad you did or that this cadre looked at you wrong or whatever the case may be, like nobody cares about that. And it's just going to make you look like a complainer, and complainers don't peer well, right?
No.
So don't have negative self-talk, like don't self-select throughout the process, but damn sure don't do it out loud or to other people. And just like Kevin said, and we talked about earlier, have that presence of mind, keep your head, like I kind of like to use an analogy for team week. Think about team week as a combat operation, right? Like this is the highest stress portion of the course and the closest that the cadre can replicate how a person is going to act on a combat operation. Like, are you the type of guy who is going to be in Afghanistan and you're carrying 110 pounds of gear and a freaking saw through the middle of the desert, and you're just going to be looking at the ground, looking at your feet, not necessarily helping the team out, not necessarily looking for work? or are you going to be the guy that is calling stuff out on comms and actively participating in the mission? Like, that is the stuff that those guys are looking for. So treat it as if it's that combat operation, and keep your head up, keep your presence of mind as you're going through it.
Dig it, man. I think that's a good, solid spot to end it. I think we got some really good questions, and I appreciate you guys asking them. And I also appreciate having another point of view to kind of help me not miss things and just keep things as comprehensive as possible. So yeah, Jon, I really appreciate having you on, man. Where can people find you?
Yeah, Instagram, YouTube, just shoot me a message, whatever. And then we do have a website, infinitegrit.us. But no, really good time, man. And if you're up for it, we'll have to bring you on I've been pretty bad about it recently, but bring you on the Infinite Grit podcast and introduce you to the audience, man. For anybody that hasn't already known or seen you, I'm sure they have as well.
Yeah, man, I would absolutely love that. Just keep me posted. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, guys, for listening. Till next time, Terminator and Jon out.
There you guys.